She found the cowboy trying to mend a shirt and took the needle from his shaking hands. That simple act of kindness in a storm-battered Wyoming station would unravel both their carefully guarded hearts. Eleanor Wade had fled Boston to escape scandal. Caleb Rowe had survived a war that left him broken. Neither was looking for salvation. But on that rain-soaked spring evening in 1876, fate had other plans. Stay with us until the end, and comment your city below so we can see how far this story travels across the world. The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Wyoming plains, driving rain against the weathered boards of the station house with the fury of 1,000 angry ghosts. Eleanor Wade pressed herself against the rough wooden wall inside, her traveling dress heavy and cold against her skin, water streaming from the hem to pool around her worn leather boots. She'd been foolish to wear such impractical clothing for a journey like this, but then again, everything about her decision to come west had been foolish, hadn't it? The thunderclap that followed made her jump, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the grimy window, she could barely make out the silhouette of the train that had deposited her here, already disappearing into the storm like a phantom, its whistle a mournful cry swallowed by the tempest. The other passengers, all three of them, had been met by family or friends, hustled away into covered wagons before the worst of the storm hit. But Eleanor had no one. No one knew she was coming. No one was expecting Eleanor Wade, failed fiancée, subject of whispered scandal, 24 years old and already considered a spinster by Boston society's cruel standards. "You all right there, miss?" The voice startled her. She turned to find the station master, a wizened man with a face like tanned leather and eyes that had seen too many seasons, watching her with concern from behind his cluttered desk. A pot-bellied stove glowed red in the corner, throwing dancing shadows across walls plastered with train schedules and wanted posters. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor managed, though her voice betrayed her with a tremor. The storm caught me unprepared." "Spring storms out here don't ask permission, miss. They just come." He scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. "You waiting for someone?" "No, She hesitated. How much should she reveal? "I'm the new school teacher for Prosper Ridge." The old man's eyebrows rose. "That's so? Well, I'll be. We heard someone was coming but didn't know when. Prosper Ridge is about 8 miles north. You won't be going nowhere tonight, not in this blow. Old Widow Henshaw runs a boarding house about a quarter-mile up the road. I can take her." Both Eleanor and the station master turned toward the voice. In the dim corner she hadn't properly noticed before, a man sat on a rough wooden bench, hunched over something in his lap. He was tall, that much was evident even seated, with shoulders broad enough to block out the wall behind him. Dark hair fell across his forehead, damp with rain or sweat she couldn't tell. His clothes were practical. Worn denim pants, a shirt that might once have been blue, and a leather vest that had seen better days. Boots caked with mud stretched out before him. But what caught Eleanor's attention, what made her breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, were his hands. Large, weathered hands that shook violently as they struggled to thread a needle through a torn shirt sleeve, the fabric already stained dark with what could only be blood. "Caleb, you sure?" the station master asked, concern evident in his tone. "You look like you've been rode hard and put up wet." "I'm fine, Henry." The man, Caleb, didn't look up from his task, his jaw set in stubborn determination. But Eleanor could see the frustration in every line of his body, the way the needle kept missing the fabric, the way his fingers couldn't quite grip it properly. "Just a little cut. Need to fix this before I head home anyway. Widow Henshaw's place is on my way." Eleanor found herself moving before she'd made a conscious decision to do so. Perhaps it was the teacher in her, the part that couldn't stand to watch someone struggle with a task she could easily accomplish. Perhaps it was something else, some instinct she didn't want to examine too closely. She crossed the small space in 5 steps and knelt before the stranger, her wet skirt spreading around her like a dark pool. "May I?" Caleb's head snapped up, and for the first time Eleanor saw his face fully. It was a face that had known hardship, lined around the eyes and mouth in ways that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun and bearing burdens that left invisible scars. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. But his eyes, they were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent, and they fixed on her now with an intensity that made her want to look away and lean closer all at once. "Miss, you don't have to—" "Your hands are shaking too badly. You'll hurt yourself worse." She kept her voice gentle but firm, the same tone she'd used with recalcitrant students back in Boston. "Please, let me help." For a long moment he held her gaze, something unreadable flickering in those storm-gray eyes. Then slowly he extended his hands toward her, the needle and thread cradled in his trembling palms. His hands were warm despite the cold, rough with calluses and marked with the small scars of a life lived outdoors. A long cut ran across his left palm, still seeping blood, explaining both the tremor and the stained shirt. Eleanor took the needle carefully, her fingers brushing his for just an instant, a touch that sent an unexpected jolt through her, like touching a doorknob after walking across a wool carpet. She pulled back quickly, focusing on the task at hand, threading the needle with steady fingers while he held the shirt sleeve taut. "This is going to need more than just sewing," she said quietly, examining the torn fabric. "The cut in your hand. Have you cleaned it?" "Not yet, ma'am. Was trying to get the shirt fixed first. Can't ride home half naked in this weather." Despite herself, despite the strangeness of the situation and the impropriety of kneeling before a man she'd never met, Eleanor felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Priorities, I suppose. Though I'd argue your health should come first." "You'd argue wrong, then. Had worse than this plenty of times." But there was no hostility in his voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance of pain that made Eleanor's heart twist unexpectedly. What kind of life left a man so accustomed to injury that he considered a wound like this an inconvenience rather than a crisis? She began to sew, her stitches small and neat, the muscle memory of years of mending coming back despite the fact that she hadn't done such work since leaving Boston. In her aunt's house, she'd been expected to maintain her own wardrobe, to be useful even as she was hidden away like a shameful secret. The work had been tedious, but now she found it soothing, the repetitive motion calming her frayed nerves. "You're good at that," Caleb observed after a moment. His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot, but not unpleasant. "The sewing. My aunt insisted I learn, along with every other skill deemed appropriate for a woman of good breeding." Eleanor couldn't quite keep the bitterness from her tone. Good breeding. As if she were a horse to be judged at auction. As if all those accomplishments had mattered one bit when scandal had touched her family's name. "You don't sound too fond of your aunt." Eleanor looked up at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. Most men in her experience didn't notice such nuances, didn't care about the emotions hiding beneath social niceties. But Caleb was watching her with those storm cloud eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling that he saw far more than she wanted him to. "My aunt did her duty," she said carefully, returning her attention to the stitching. "She took me in when I had nowhere else to go. I'm grateful for that." But gratitude and fondness are different things. It wasn't a question. Eleanor found herself nodding before she could stop herself. "Yes, they are." Thunder rolled overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the station house. The oil lamp on Henry's desk flickered wildly, and for a moment Eleanor was sure it would go out, leaving them in darkness. But it steadied, and she continued sewing, the needle flashing silver in the lamplight. "What brings you west, Miss Wade?" Henry called from his desk, clearly trying to fill the heavy silence with conversation. "Teaching is a respectable profession back east, I hear. Seems like it'd be easier than coming all the way out here to the frontier." Eleanor's fingers paused for just a heartbeat before continuing their work. How to answer that? How to explain that sometimes staying was more dangerous than leaving, that whispers and pointed looks could cut deeper than any knife, that the respectable profession Henry spoke of had been closed to her the moment Thomas Montgomery had decided she wasn't worth the scandal of defending? "I needed a change," she said finally, knowing how inadequate the words were. "The West seemed full of possibility." "Or empty of the past," Caleb said softly. So softly she almost thought she'd imagined it. Her eyes flew to his face, but he was looking down at his wounded hand, his expression unreadable. How had he known? What had he seen in her carefully neutral words that had revealed the truth she was trying so hard to hide? "Yes," she whispered, barely audible. That too. For a moment their eyes met again, and Eleanor felt something pass between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared pain. This man, this stranger whose shirt she was mending in a storm-battered station in the middle of nowhere, understood something about running from the past. She could see it in the shadows behind his eyes, in the set of his shoulders, in the way he held himself, as if always ready for the next blow. There, she said, tying off the thread and biting it cleanly with her teeth, a practical gesture her aunt would have found appalling. That should hold, though you really need to let someone look at that hand properly. I will. Thank you, miss. He stood, and Eleanor scrambled to her feet as well, suddenly aware of how improper the whole situation was. She'd been kneeling before a strange man, had touched his hands, had sat closer to him than society would ever deem appropriate. But out here, in this wild place where storms raged and propriety seemed as fragile as paper, did those rules still matter? Caleb shrugged into the mended shirt, wincing slightly as the fabric pulled against his injured hand. He was even taller than she'd thought, well over 6 feet, and he had to duck slightly to avoid the low-hanging lamp. I mean it about the ride, Miss Wade. Can't let you walk to Widow Henshaw's in this storm. My horse is tied up out back under cover. She's sturdy enough to carry 2. Oh, I couldn't possibly. You could, and you will, he said firmly, but not unkindly. It's not safe, and I won't have it on my conscience. Besides, a ghost of a smile touched his lips, barely visible beneath the stubble. You just did me a kindness. Least I can do is return it. Eleanor wanted to argue. Every lesson she'd learned about proper behavior, about maintaining distance from strange men, about protecting her already tarnished reputation screamed at her to refuse. But as another crack of thunder split the air and rain lashed the windows with renewed fury, practical sense won out. She was cold, exhausted from days of travel, and had nowhere else to go. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Thank you, Mr. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Rowe. Caleb Rowe. He extended his right hand, the uninjured one, and after a moment's hesitation, Eleanor took it. His grip was firm but careful, and again she felt that strange jolt of connection, like recognition of something she couldn't name. I run a ranch out by Prosper Ridge. Cattle, mostly. Been out here about 5 years now. Eleanor Wade. She released his hand, folding her own together in front of her to hide their sudden trembling. Formerly of Boston. As you heard, I'm the new schoolteacher. Boston. Caleb nodded slowly, something like understanding crossing his face. Long way from home. Yes. Eleanor met his eyes steadily. But then, this is home now, isn't it? Or it will be. Takes a brave woman to come west alone. Or a desperate one. He said it without judgment, simply stating a fact, and somehow that made it easier to bear. Which are you, Miss Wade? The question hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch. Eleanor thought of Thomas, of the way he'd looked through her at that final dinner party, as if she'd become invisible the moment scandal had threatened to touch him. She thought of her aunt's tight-lipped disappointment, of the doors that had closed one by one, of the suffocating feeling that her entire life had already been decided and found wanting. Maybe both, she said finally. Can a person be both? Caleb studied her for a long moment, and she had the strange feeling of being catalogued, assessed, understood in a way that should have felt invasive but somehow didn't. Yes, he said quietly. I reckon a person can be both. Most people out here are. You speaking from experience, Mr. Rowe? Something flickered in his eyes, pain, memory, regret. She couldn't tell. We all got our reasons for being where we are, Miss Wade. Some of us just got better reasons than others. Before Eleanor could respond, Henry cleared his throat loudly. Caleb, you sure you're up for riding in this? That hand... I'm fine, Henry. Stop fussing. But Caleb's voice was affectionate rather than annoyed. Clearly, these two men knew each other well. Let me get my coat and we'll be on our way. Miss Wade, you got bags? Just one trunk. It's outside by the platform. I'll fetch it. You wait here where it's dry. He strode to the door, moving with a slight limp she hadn't noticed before. Another injury. Another scar. Another piece of a story she didn't know. The door swung open with a bang, emitting a blast of wind and rain that made the lamp flame dance wildly. Then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. Eleanor turned to find Henry watching her with an expression that was hard to read. "Caleb's a good man," the old station master said carefully. "Been through hell and back, pardon my language. But he's got a good heart. Just wounded, if you take my meaning." "I don't—" Eleanor started to protest that she had no particular interest in Caleb Rowe's character, that this was simply a practical arrangement, a stranger helping another stranger in a storm. But the words died on her lips because they weren't true. She was interested, dangerously, inexplicably interested in the man with storm cloud eyes and shaking hands, the man who noticed the things she didn't say, who understood about running from the past. "Just thought you should know," Henry continued. "In case you were wondering, folks around here, we look after each other. And we look after Caleb on account of what he's been through. So if you're going to be teaching our children, you should know he's the sort of man who'd give you the shirt off his back, literally, as you just saw, but he's also the sort who might not be able to give much more than that. He's got his demons, like we all do. His just got sharper teeth than most." Eleanor absorbed this information, unsure what to do with it. She hadn't asked for a character reference, hadn't asked for anything except a way out of Boston and a chance to start fresh. But here was Henry, practically a stranger himself, warning her about another stranger, as if there was already something to warn about, as if a simple act of sewing and a shared ride through a storm meant something more than passing kindness between people thrown together by circumstance. "I'm not looking for—" she began, then stopped. What wasn't she looking for? Romance? She'd had that, and it had ended in humiliation. Marriage? That door had been closed to her the moment Thomas had walked away. A fresh start? But wasn't that exactly what she'd come here for? "I'm just here to teach, Mr. Henry, that's all." "Call me Henry, miss. Just Henry. And I'm sure that's true." But he smiled as he said it, a knowing smile that made Eleanor want to protest further and also to hide her face, because somehow this old man she'd known for all of 20 minutes could see something she was trying very hard not to acknowledge herself. But life out here has a way of surprising folks. You might come looking for one thing and find something else entirely. Just keep an open mind, that's all I'm saying. Before Eleanor could respond, the door crashed open again and Caleb reappeared, her trunk hoisted over his shoulder as if it weighed nothing at all. Water streamed from his coat and hat, and his face was set in lines of concentration as he maneuvered the heavy trunk inside. "Got it," he said unnecessarily, setting it down with a heavy thunk that made the floorboard shudder. "You travel light, Miss Wade. Some of the ladies who come through here bring enough luggage to stock a general store." Eleanor thought of all the things she'd left behind, the fancy dresses that no longer fit her new life, the jewelry that had been sold to pay debts, the books that had been too precious to part with but too numerous to bring. This trunk held everything she owned now: 3 practical dresses, 2 sets of undergarments, a coat, a few books she couldn't bear to abandon, and a daguerreotype of her parents, both long dead. The sum total of 24 years of life, reduced to one manageable trunk. "I'm not like most ladies," she said quietly. Caleb's eyes met hers, and for just a moment that ghost of a smile returned. "No," he agreed. "I don't reckon you are." He secured the trunk with practiced efficiency, tying it with rope he produced from somewhere in his coat, then turned to Henry. "Tell Doc Pritchard I'll be by tomorrow to get this hand looked at properly, and let Martha know at the general store that I'll need to settle my account end of the week." "Will do, Caleb. You take care now, you hear? And Miss Wade, welcome to Wyoming. Hope it treats you better than that storm suggests." Eleanor managed a smile, though her nerves were wound tight as piano wire. "Thank you, Henry, for everything." Then Caleb was opening the door again, ushering her out into the maelstrom. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and nearly knocking her off her feet. But Caleb's hand was suddenly at her elbow, steadying her, his grip strong and sure despite the injury. Together they made their way around the side of the building, heads bent against the rain, shoes squelching in the mud that seemed to be everywhere. The horse was a big roan mare, standing patiently under a rough lean-to that provided scant shelter from the storm. She turned her head as they approached, her dark eyes calm despite the chaos around her. Caleb ran a hand down her neck, murmured, and the horse nickered softly in response. "This is Ruby," Caleb said, raising his voice to be heard. "She's steady in storms, won't bolt on you." He helped Eleanor mount first, and she'd never been so grateful for the riding lessons her aunt had insisted upon. She settled into the saddle, grateful for the warmth of the horse beneath her, then gasped as Caleb swung up behind her, his body solid and warm against her back. His arms came around her to grip the reins, essentially caging her in, and Eleanor felt heat flood her face that had nothing to do with exertion. This was beyond improper. This was practically scandalous. If anyone from Boston could see her now, riding through a Wyoming storm pressed against a strange man's chest, his arms around her, his breath warm against her ear, they would have fainted dead away. Or more likely, they would have added it to the long list of Eleanor Wade's sins, more proof that she was exactly the sort of woman Thomas Montgomery had been right to abandon. But there was no one from Boston here to see. There was only the storm and the darkness and the steady rhythm of Ruby's hooves as Caleb guided her out into the tempest. Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself lean back, just slightly, into Caleb's solid warmth. Just for practical purposes, she told herself, just to stay on the horse. They rode in silence for what might have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose meaning in the howling dark. Eleanor could feel Caleb's heartbeat against her back, steady and strong, and she found herself synchronizing her breathing to its rhythm. His injured hand held the reins alongside his good one, and though she couldn't see it in the darkness, she could sense the pain he must be in, the effort it took to maintain control of the horse while wounded. "How much farther?" she called back over her shoulder, half turning her head to be heard. "Not far. See that light? That's the boarding house." Caleb's voice rumbled against her ear, and Eleanor fought down a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Widow Henshaw will take good care of you. She's a good woman, lost her husband in the war, came west to start over. You'll like her." Another person running from the past, Eleanor thought. Were they all refugees here? All the lost and broken souls that had washed up on this frontier like driftwood after a storm? Was that what the West really was? Not a land of opportunity, but a land of second chances for people who'd used up all their first chances? The boarding house materialized out of the darkness like a ship in fog, a two-story structure with light glowing warm in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney. Caleb guided Ruby right up to the covered porch, which provided some shelter from the worst of the rain, and dismounted with a fluid grace that seemed at odds with his earlier trembling and his slight limp. He reached up to help Eleanor down, his hand spanning her waist, lifting her as easily as he'd lifted her trunk. For just a moment, she was suspended in his grip, her face level with his, close enough to see the water droplets caught in his dark eyelashes, close enough to see the way his pupils dilated in the lamplight spilling from the windows. Then her feet touched the ground, but his hands remained at her waist, steadying her, and neither of them moved. "Miss Wade?" he said softly, and his voice had changed somehow, become gentler, more intimate. "Eleanor, if I may?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I want to thank you. For the sewing, yes, but also for—" He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "For not asking questions, for not looking at me like I was broken. People out here, they know my story, and they either treat me like I might shatter at any moment or like I'm a hero, and I'm neither of those things. I'm just a man trying to get by, and you just saw a shirt that needed mending, that's all. And I appreciated that more than you know." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I saw a man who needed help," she said quietly. "That's all. Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing's ever not complicated, Miss Wade. That's something you learn out here right quick." He released her waist, stepping back, and Eleanor felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. But sometimes simple kindness is the most complicated thing of all, especially when you're not used to receiving it. Before Eleanor could respond to that, before she could even process what he meant, the door to the boarding house burst open and a woman appeared, silhouetted in the lamplight. She was small and round, with gray-streaked hair escaping from a bun and an apron that had seen better days. Her face, when the light caught it, was lined but kind, with the sort of laugh lines that suggested she smiled often. "Caleb Rowe, is that you out there? And who— Oh, my stars, is this our new school teacher? Come in, you're both soaked through. What are you thinking riding in weather like this? You'll catch your death. The woman, Widow Henshaw presumably, bustled down the steps with surprising agility for someone her age, taking Eleanor by the arm and practically dragging her toward the door. Come on, dear, let's get you dry. Caleb, you bring that trunk up, and then you march yourself right in here too. That hand looks terrible even from here. I've got hot water on and some of my special salve that'll fix that right up. Martha, I'm fine. Don't you, Martha, I'm fine me, Caleb Rowe. I've known you since you first came to Prosper Ridge, looking like a scarecrow that had lost a fight with a threshing machine, and I'll not have you bleeding all over my clean floors because you're too stubborn to accept help. She turned to Eleanor, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Men. Think they have to be strong all the time, don't know when to let themselves be cared for. You'll learn that out here, Miss Wade. The secret to managing frontier men is knowing when to listen to their protests and when to ignore them completely. Despite everything, the cold, the exhaustion, the strangeness of her new circumstances, Eleanor felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. There was something infectious about Martha Henshaw's energy, something warm and maternal that made Eleanor's heart ache with longing for things she'd lost or never had. I'll remember that, Mrs. Henshaw. Oh, none of that Mrs. business. I'm Martha to everyone worth knowing, and I have a feeling you're going to be worth knowing, Miss Wade. Come on. Let's get you inside. Caleb, trunk. Now. Caleb met Eleanor's eyes over Martha's head, and there it was again. That ghost of a smile that transformed his face, made him look younger, less haunted. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and endearing. Yes, ma'am, he said meekly, but his eyes sparkled with suppressed amusement. The inside of the boarding house was exactly what Eleanor had hoped for. Warm, clean, and welcoming. A fire crackled in a large stone fireplace, and the main room was furnished with comfortable if worn furniture. Quilts draped over the backs of chairs, and the smell of something delicious, stew, maybe, or soup, wafted from what must be the kitchen. Two other women sat near the fire, looking up with frank curiosity as Eleanor entered, but Martha shooed them away with practiced efficiency. Sarah, Emma, I'll introduce you to Miss Wade properly tomorrow. Right now she needs to get dry and warm, and Caleb needs medical attention he won't admit to needing. Go on now, back to your rooms. The women went without protest, though they cast interested looks over their shoulders as they climbed the stairs. Eleanor stood dripping on the rug, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must look, how far she'd fallen from the polished young woman who'd left Boston weeks ago. Caleb brought in the trunk, setting it by the stairs, then stood awkwardly near the door as if unsure whether to stay or go. Martha took one look at him and pointed firmly at a chair by the fire. Sit, I'll get the medical supplies. Martha, really, I should get home. Mabel will be worried. Mabel's 17 years old and perfectly capable of handling one evening alone. Besides, you told me yourself she was staying over at the Pritchard place tonight to help with the new baby, so don't you dare use your sister as an excuse. Martha disappeared into another room, leaving Caleb and Eleanor alone by the fire. They looked at each other, and Eleanor felt that strange pull again, that sense of recognition she couldn't explain. They were strangers, had known each other for less than an hour, and yet standing here in the firelight, dripping onto Martha's rug, watching the play of shadows across Caleb's scarred face, Eleanor felt less alone than she had in months, maybe years. Your sister, she said, grasping for conversation, for something to fill the charged silence. Mabel. She's younger than you? By 13 years, our mother died when Mabel was born, and our father... Caleb's jaw tightened. He died in the war, so she's my responsibility now. Has been since I was 19. 19. Good God, he'd taken on the responsibility of raising a child when he was barely more than a child himself. Eleanor thought of herself at 19, spoiled, sheltered, utterly unprepared for real life. What must it have been like for him, coming home from war? Because surely that's where he'd been. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, hear it in the way he said the war, as if those words held the weight of the world. To find himself the sole guardian of an infant sister? That must have been difficult, she said inadequately. It was. Still is sometimes. But Mabel's the best thing in my life. The only purely good thing, if I'm being honest. He looked into the fire, and Eleanor saw pain chase across his face like clouds across the sun. Everything else got complicated. Martha returned before Eleanor could respond, her arms full of bandages and bottles. All right, Caleb, let's see that hand. And Miss Wade, there's a screen in the corner there. I've laid out a dressing gown. It'll be too short for you. You're taller than me, but it's dry. Change into that and I'll hang your dress by the fire to dry. Tomorrow we'll see about getting you properly settled. Eleanor retreated behind the screen, grateful for the privacy and the chance to collect her thoughts. She could hear Martha's voice, gentle but firm, as she tended to Caleb's hand, and his occasional hiss of pain quickly stifled. Her own hands trembled as she unbuttoned her dress, from cold, she told herself, just from cold, and slipped into the soft cotton dressing gown Martha had provided. It felt strange to be here, in this little boarding house on the Wyoming frontier, wearing a stranger's clothes, listening to another stranger have his wounds tended, feeling things she had no business feeling for a man she'd just met. This wasn't like her. Eleanor Wade was practical, sensible, not given to flights of fancy or romantic notions. That's what Thomas had said anyway, that she was too sensible, too serious, not playful enough for a man of his station. But maybe Thomas didn't know her as well as he'd thought. Maybe she didn't know herself as well as she'd thought. Because standing here, listening to Caleb's voice rumble through the quiet room, she felt something stirring in her chest that was neither sensible nor serious, something that felt dangerously like hope. All right, Miss Wade, Martha called out. You decent? Eleanor emerged from behind the screen, her wet clothes bundled in her arms. Martha took them with a maternal efficiency, tutting over the quality of the fabric. This is good wool, but not made for frontier weather. We'll have to see about getting you something more practical. I can sew, Eleanor offered. If you can direct me to a general store with fabric, we'll sort all that out. For now, sit. Martha pointed to the chair opposite Caleb, who was now slumped in his seat with his left hand properly bandaged and a cup of something steaming in his right. I'll get you some tea, and then I want to hear all about what brings a Boston girl to our little corner of Wyoming. Eleanor sat, tucking her feet under the dressing gown and pulling a quilt around her shoulders that Martha had draped over the chair. The fire was warm on her face, making her aware of just how cold she'd been. Across from her, Caleb watched with those storm cloud eyes, and she wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Another runaway, another refugee from a life that had gone wrong, or something else. Martha returned with tea, real tea, not the weak substitutes Eleanor had grown accustomed to during her journey, and settled herself in a chair between them like a benevolent matchmaker, though Eleanor was surely imagining that interpretation. So, Martha said, her eyes twinkling in the firelight. Our new school teacher. The whole town's been buzzing about you for weeks. Where you'd come from, what you'd be like, whether you'd last more than a month out here. Some folks placed bets, if you can believe that. Eleanor felt her cheeks heat with something other than the fire's warmth. Bets? Oh, don't mind them. Frontier folk will bet on anything. It's how we pass the time. Martha sipped her own tea, studying Eleanor over the rim of her cup. But I can tell already those bets were foolish. You've got steel in you, girl. I can see it. You wouldn't have made it this far if you didn't. I don't feel particularly strong, Eleanor admitted quietly. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding myself together. That's the definition of strength out here, Miss Wade, Caleb said softly. Not feeling strong, but carrying on anyway. Not being unbroken, but putting yourself back together every morning and facing the day. Anyone who tells you different is either a fool or a liar. Their eyes met across the space between the chairs, and Eleanor felt something lock into place inside her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. This man understood. Whatever else happened, whatever complications arose from this strange beginning in the storm, Caleb Rowe understood what it meant to be broken and to keep going anyway. Well said, Caleb, Martha approved. And speaking of carrying on, Miss Wade, you should know that the schoolhouse is in good shape. Old Miss Crawford, who taught before you, she kept it neat as a pin, left you all her supplies and books when she moved back east to live with her daughter. The school board's eager to meet you. They'll likely come calling tomorrow if the storm's passed. And the children? Oh, you'll love the children. 32 of them, ranging from little Tommy Peterson, who's just 6, to the Hoffman twins who are 15 and think they're too old for school. Eleanor listened as Martha outlined the details of her new position, the rhythm of life in Prosper Ridge, the people she'd need to know. But part of her attention remained on Caleb, who sat quietly drinking his tea, his bandaged hand resting on his knee, his expression distant. What was he thinking? Would she see him again after tonight, or was this just a brief encounter, two ships passing in a storm? As if sensing her thoughts, Caleb set down his cup and rose to his feet. I should go. Let you get settled, Miss Wade. Ruby will be getting restless, and I've already imposed on your hospitality long enough, Martha. Nonsense, you could never impose, but I know you're worried about getting home. Martha stood as well, bustling over to a coat rack by the door. Take this oilskin coat. It's my late husband's, and it'll keep you drier than that worn thing you rode in with. And Caleb? She waited until he looked at her. Change that bandage tomorrow. You hear me? And if it shows any sign of infection, you get yourself to Doc Pritchard immediately. Yes, ma'am. Caleb accepted the coat with a nod of thanks, then turned to Eleanor. She rose as well, suddenly not wanting him to go, though she couldn't have said why. He was nothing to her. A stranger who'd given her a ride, nothing more. But when he held out his good hand to her, she took it without hesitation, and the contact felt like something more than a simple goodbye. It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Wade, he said formally, but his eyes were warm. I expect we'll see each other around town. Prosper Ridge is small enough that everyone knows everyone, for better or worse. I look forward to it, Eleanor heard herself say. And Mr. Rowe, thank you. For the ride, for everything. His fingers tightened briefly around hers. The pleasure was mine, ma'am, and I meant what I said. Thank you for the sewing, for the kindness. It's been a while since... He trailed off, shook his head slightly. Well, good night, Miss Wade. Martha. Then he was gone, disappearing back out into the storm, and Eleanor stood at the window watching until the darkness swallowed him completely. Behind her, she could feel Martha's knowing eyes on her back, but the older woman said nothing, simply began gathering up the medical supplies and humming a tune Eleanor didn't recognize. Martha, Eleanor said finally, still staring out into the rain. What did you mean earlier, when you said Caleb was looking like a scarecrow that lost a fight with a threshing machine when he first came here? Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's his story to tell, dear, not mine. But I will say this. Caleb Rowe came to Prosper Ridge 5 years ago with nothing but a young sister to care for, a head full of ghosts, and hands that shook so bad he couldn't hold a cup of coffee without spilling it. And he built himself back up piece by piece, day by day, until he became the man you saw tonight. He's still got his demons, probably always will. But he's one of the good ones, Miss Wade, one of the genuinely good ones. And those are rare, in my experience. Eleanor absorbed this, her reflection ghostly in the rain-streaked window. What happened to him? The war happened to him. Same thing that happened to a lot of men. Some of them came home in body only, if you take my meaning. Some of them came home and drank themselves to death trying to forget. Some of them came home and took their own lives because the remembering was too much. Caleb came home and chose to live, but living is a choice he has to make fresh every day. That's what the shaking hands mean, dear. That's what the nightmares mean. Yes, he has nightmares. Ask anyone who's been within a mile of his ranch at night. That's what the look in his eyes means when he thinks nobody's watching. Eleanor turned from the window to face Martha fully. The older woman's face was soft with compassion and something else, hope maybe, or matchmaking instincts that Eleanor wasn't sure she wanted to encourage. I'm not... Eleanor started, then stopped. What was she going to say? That she wasn't interested? That she wasn't looking for romance? Both would be lies, and she'd promised herself when she left Boston that she was done with lies, even the ones we tell ourselves. I'm not sure I have anything to offer someone like him. Martha's smile was gentle. Maybe that's not for you to decide alone, dear. Now come on, let's get you upstairs to your room. Tomorrow's going to be a big day, and you need your rest. As Eleanor followed Martha up the narrow stairs, her trunk miraculously already waiting in a small but clean room, she found herself thinking about Caleb Rowe, about his shaking hands and his storm cloud eyes and the way he'd understood without being told, about running from the past, about the sister he'd raised alone and the ranch he'd built from nothing and the demons Martha said he faced down every day. And as she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the storm finally beginning to ease outside her window, Eleanor Wade, practical, sensible Eleanor, who didn't believe in fate or destiny or love at first sight, found herself hoping that Martha was right. That maybe, just maybe, some decisions weren't meant to be made alone. Outside, lightning flashed one last time, illuminating the wild Wyoming plains. Somewhere out there, Caleb Rowe was riding home through the dying storm. And somehow, Eleanor knew that this was only the beginning, that their paths had crossed in that train station for a reason, that she'd taken the needle from his shaking hands and in doing so had thread their fates together in ways neither of them could yet see. The storm had brought her west, but maybe, just maybe, it had brought her home too. Morning arrived with the kind of crystalline brightness that only follows a violent storm, the sky scrubbed clean and blue as a robin's egg. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her room, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For a confused moment, she thought she was still in Boston, in her narrow bed at her aunt's house, and the relief that flooded through her when she remembered Wyoming, freedom, a fresh start, was almost painful in its intensity. She dressed quickly in one of her practical dresses, a deep green cotton that had seen better days but was still respectable, and made her way downstairs. The boarding house was already alive with activity. Martha stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, while the two women Eleanor had glimpsed the night before sat at a long wooden table, deep in conversation. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," Martha called out cheerfully. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep until noon. Come, sit, eat. Sarah, Emma, move over and make room for Miss Wade." The two women shifted obligingly, and Eleanor found herself seated between them, a plate of steaming pancakes and bacon appearing before her as if by magic. Sarah was younger, perhaps 25, with wheat blonde hair and tired eyes that suggested a hard life. Emma was older, closer to 40, with graying brown hair pulled back in a severe bun and the weathered skin of someone who'd spent years in the sun. "Miss Wade, these are two of my regulars," Martha explained, pouring coffee into a chipped mug and setting it in front of Eleanor. "Sarah works at the general store, and Emma does washing and mending for half the town. Ladies, this is Eleanor Wade, our new school teacher." "Pleasure," Sarah said with a genuine smile. "We heard you arrived in quite the dramatic fashion last night. Caleb Rowe bringing you through the storm and all." Emma snorted. "Trust Caleb to play the hero, though I hear his hand was in bad shape. Man's always getting himself hurt somehow." "Now, Emma, that's not fair," Martha chided gently. "Caleb's a rancher. Injuries are part of the work." "Injuries are one thing. The way that man courts danger is another." But Emma's tone was more concerned than critical. "Still, it was good of him to see Miss Wade safely here, though I imagine tongues will be wagging about it all over town by now." Eleanor's stomach twisted uncomfortably. "Wagging? But nothing happened. He simply gave me a ride." Sarah patted her hand sympathetically. "Welcome to small-town life, Miss Wade. In Prosper Ridge, a man and woman riding together through a storm is enough to fuel gossip for weeks. Don't worry, though. Once folks meet you properly, they'll see you're respectable. And Caleb's reputation is solid enough to withstand a little speculation." "His reputation?" Eleanor heard herself ask, then immediately wished she hadn't. She didn't want to seem too interested, didn't want to encourage the knowing look she could see Martha, Sarah, and Emma exchanging. "Caleb's one of the most respected men in the territory," Martha said firmly. "Built his ranch from nothing, raises his sister proper, helps his neighbors without being asked. If anyone has a problem with him giving the new school teacher a ride in a storm, they can answer to me." "There was some talk when he first arrived," Emma admitted, lowering her voice as if imparting a great secret. "About where he'd come from, what he'd done during the war. You know how people are. They fear what they don't understand. But Caleb's proven himself time and again. He's good people." Eleanor wanted to ask more. What had he done during the war? Why had there been talk? But something in Martha's expression warned her off. These were Caleb's secrets to share, not stories to be gossiped over breakfast. So instead, she focused on her pancakes, which were delicious, and tried not to think about storm cloud eyes and bandaged hands. After breakfast, Martha walked her to the schoolhouse. It was a beautiful morning for a walk. The air washed clean and sweet, the muddy streets already beginning to dry in the fierce Wyoming sun. Prosper Ridge was larger than Eleanor had expected, a proper town with a main street lined with businesses. She counted a general store, a blacksmith, a doctor's office, a church with a white steeple, a saloon, which made her blush to even look at, and various other establishments that spoke of a community trying hard to be civilized. "We're growing," Martha said with evident pride. "When I first came here 10 years ago, there were maybe 20 families. Now we've got near 100, and more arriving every season. The railroad coming through has helped, brings trade and new folks. Though not everyone who comes stays, frontier life isn't for everybody." "Do many people leave?" "Some. Usually the ones who came expecting something easier than what they found. The West has a way of showing you who you really are, Miss Wade. Some folks don't like what they see in that mirror." They turned off the main street onto a smaller lane, and there it was, a tidy white building with a bell tower and a small porch. The schoolhouse. Eleanor's schoolhouse now. Her heart began to hammer with a mixture of excitement and terror. This was real. This was actually happening. She was going to teach frontier children in a one-room schoolhouse in Wyoming, hundreds of miles from everything she'd ever known. "It's perfect," she breathed. Martha beamed. "Wait until you see inside." The interior was even better than Eleanor had hoped. Rows of wooden desks, neatly arranged, a large slate board at the front, shelves lined with books. Not many, but more than she'd expected. A teacher's desk with a chair that had seen better days but was still sturdy. Windows on both sides letting in abundant light. A pot-bellied stove in the corner for winter warmth. And everywhere, the smell of chalk and old wood and possibility. "Miss Crawford kept it nice," Martha said softly. "She taught here for 15 years. It broke her heart to leave, but her daughter needed her back east. She left everything for you, her lesson plans, her supplies, even her personal books. Said she hoped the next teacher would love this place as much as she did." Eleanor walked slowly around the room, trailing her fingers over the desks, imagining them filled with children. 32 students, Martha had said, aged 6 to 15. She'd taught before, back in Boston, but only the daughters of wealthy families, teaching them needlework and basic mathematics and how to be proper ladies. This would be different. This would be teaching ranch children and miners' kids, children who needed education to build lives in this harsh, beautiful land. "When do I start?" she asked. "School board's meeting this evening to officially approve your hire. Just a formality, mind you. They're desperate for a teacher. Then you'll start Monday. That gives you a few days to settle in, prepare lessons, meet some of the families." Martha hesitated, then added carefully, "There's a church social tomorrow evening. The whole town will be there. It's the perfect opportunity for folks to meet you properly." Eleanor's stomach clenched. A social. That meant being on display, being judged, having to make polite conversation with strangers who would all be assessing whether she was suitable to teach their children. It meant facing whatever gossip had already spread about her arrival with Caleb Rowe. But it was also necessary. She needed the community's acceptance to succeed here. "I'll be there," she said, trying to sound confident. "That's the spirit. And don't worry, I'll be right there with you. And I know Sarah and Emma will be too. We'll make sure you meet all the right people." Martha's eyes twinkled. "And some of the wrong ones too, probably. Can't avoid them in a town this size." They spent the next hour going through Miss Crawford's supplies and lesson plans. The former teacher had been meticulous in her organization, and Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude for this woman she'd never met, who'd left her such a solid foundation to build upon. By the time Martha declared it was time for lunch, Eleanor's head was swimming with information about which children needed extra help with reading, which families were struggling financially, which students were likely to cause trouble. "The Hoffman twins," Martha warned as they locked up the schoolhouse, "are going to test you. They've run off 3 substitute teachers in the month since Miss Crawford left. They're not bad boys, just spirited and convinced they don't need more schooling." "I'll manage," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. They were walking back toward the boarding house when Eleanor heard it, the sound of a horse being ridden hard, hooves thundering on the packed earth. She turned to see a girl racing down the main street on a paint horse, her long dark hair streaming behind her like a banner, her face lit with fierce joy. The girl couldn't have been more than 17, and she rode like she'd been born in the saddle, with a natural grace that made it look effortless. That's Mabel Rowe, Martha said, a mix of affection in her voice. Caleb's sister. The girl rides like the devil himself is chasing her, gives Caleb fits. But she's a good kid, even if she is a bit wild. Eleanor watched as Mabel pulled her horse to a stop outside the general store, dismounting in one fluid motion. The girl was beautiful in an unconventional way, all sharp angles and fierce energy, with her brother's storm-cloud eyes and a determined set to her jaw that suggested she didn't take orders easily. "Should I introduce myself?" Eleanor asked. "Why not? She'll be at the social tomorrow anyway, and Mabel's never met a stranger she couldn't charm." They crossed the street and Mabel looked up from tying her horse, her eyes widening slightly when she saw them approaching. Up close, Eleanor could see the family resemblance even more clearly. The same high cheekbones, the same intensity in the gaze, though Mabel's face was unlined by hardship, still holding the softness of youth. "Mrs. Henshaw," Mabel said warmly, then turned her attention to Eleanor with frank curiosity. "And you must be Miss Wade. Caleb told me about you this morning." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He did?" "Mm-hmm. Said he gave our new school teacher a ride through the storm last night. Also said you sewed up his shirt when his hands were shaking too bad to manage it." Mabel's gaze was assessing, but not unkind. "That was good of you. Caleb doesn't always accept help easily." "It was nothing," Eleanor said quickly. "Just a small kindness." "Small kindnesses matter out here, Miss Wade. Sometimes they matter most of all." Mabel smiled suddenly, and it transformed her face, made her look younger and more approachable. "I hope you'll like Prosper Ridge. We need a good teacher. The last few substitutes were absolutely terrible. One of them couldn't even spell arithmetic, can you imagine?" Despite her nervousness, Eleanor found herself laughing. "That does seem like a fundamental requirement for the position." "I thought so too, but don't worry. If the Hoffman twins give you trouble, just let me know. I've known them since we were all in short pants, and I know exactly how to handle them." Mabel's eyes danced with mischief. "It usually involves threatening to tell their mother about the time they put a snake in the church organ." "Mabel Rowe, you wouldn't," Martha scolded, but she was smiling. "I absolutely would. Those boys need to be reminded occasionally that someone knows all their secrets." Mabel untied her horse, preparing to mount again. "Miss Wade, it was lovely to meet you. I'm sure I'll see you at the social tomorrow." "Yes, I'll be there." "Wonderful. Fair warning, every unmarried man in 3 counties is going to want to meet you. New, pretty, and educated? You'll be the belle of the ball." Mabel swung into the saddle with that same fluid grace. "But don't let them intimidate you. Most of them are harmless, and the ones that aren't, well, we'll make sure they keep their distance." With a wave and a kick of her heels, Mabel was off again, racing down the street with reckless abandon. Eleanor watched her go, feeling a strange kinship with this wild girl who rode too fast and spoke her mind and clearly adored her brother. "She's remarkable," Eleanor said. "She is that," Martha agreed. "Caleb's done right by her, raising her alone. She's got spirit, that one. Could have gone the wrong way, after losing both parents so young. But Caleb made sure she stayed strong. He's strict with her, maybe too strict sometimes. But it comes from love. He's terrified something will happen to her." They continued back to the boarding house, where Martha insisted Eleanor rest before the school board meeting that evening. But Eleanor found herself too restless to sleep. Instead, she sat at the small desk in her room and began drafting lesson plans, trying to imagine the faces of the children she'd soon teach, trying to picture herself at the front of that tidy schoolhouse, actually doing this impossible thing she'd committed to. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Wade," Sarah's voice called. "There's someone here to see you." Eleanor's heart leaped irrationally. Caleb? But no, why would he come calling? She opened the door to find Sarah looking amused and a bit conspiratorial. "It's Mrs. Pritchard, the doctor's wife. She's on the school board. I think she wants to get a jump on meeting you before tonight's official meeting." Eleanor followed Sarah downstairs to find a formidable-looking woman waiting in the parlor. Mrs. Pritchard was tall and angular, with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She looked Eleanor up and down with an appraising gaze that would have made lesser women wilt. "Miss Wade, I'm Constance Pritchard. My husband is the town doctor, and I serve on the school board." Her voice was crisp and no nonsense. "I wanted to meet you before the formal proceedings tonight to assess your suitability for the position." Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, Mrs. Pritchard. Good. Sit. It wasn't a request. Eleanor sat, folding her hands in her lap and meeting Mrs. Pritchard's gaze steadily. First, your credentials. What experience do you have teaching? I taught for 3 years at the Fairmont Academy for Young Ladies in Boston. Reading, writing, mathematics, and deportment. That's city teaching. This is different. These children aren't pampered society girls. They're ranch kids, miners' children, farmers' sons and daughters. They need practical education, not fancy airs. I understand that, Mrs. Pritchard, and I'm prepared to adapt my methods to suit their needs. Education is education, whether it's teaching a society girl to parse Latin or a ranch child to calculate cattle prices. Mrs. Pritchard's eyebrow rose slightly. You can be practical then. Good. Too many teachers come out here with romantic notions about frontier life and run home crying after their first winter. Are you a romantic, Miss Wade? Eleanor thought of Thomas, of the shattered dreams that had sent her west. No, ma'am. I'm a pragmatist. Why did you leave Boston? The question was blunt, invasive, and clearly designed to rattle her. Eleanor took a breath, choosing her words carefully. I needed a change. My circumstances in Boston were limiting. I wanted the opportunity to build something of my own, to make a real difference. Teaching is my calling, Mrs. Pritchard, and I believe I can do more good here than I ever could in a finishing school for rich girls. It was the truth, if not the whole truth. Mrs. Pritchard studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor had the uncomfortable feeling that the woman could see straight through her carefully constructed explanations to the messy reality beneath. But finally, the older woman nodded. Fair enough. Everyone who comes west is running from something or toward something, usually both. As long as you're committed to doing the job properly, I don't care about your personal history. She stood, indicating the interview was over. The board will vote tonight, but barring any disasters, you'll be approved. School starts Monday. Don't be late, and don't coddle the children. They need firm guidance and genuine education, not sentimentality. I understand. Mrs. Pritchard moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss Wade. I heard about your arrival last night with Caleb Rowe. Frontier hospitality requires us to help strangers, and Caleb did exactly right bringing you to Martha's in that storm. But you should know that as the school teacher, you'll be held to a higher standard of conduct than most. Any hint of impropriety could cost you this position. Do I make myself clear? Eleanor felt anger flare in her chest, hot and sudden. Perfectly clear, Mrs. Pritchard, though I would point out that Mr. Rowe was simply being kind to a stranger in need, and I resent any implication otherwise. For the first time, something like approval flickered in Mrs. Pritchard's eyes. Good. You've got spine. You'll need it dealing with some of these families. I'll see you tonight at the meeting. After she left, Eleanor sagged against the door frame, her hands shaking with suppressed emotion. Was this what her life would be now? Constant judgment, constant scrutiny, having to defend simple acts of kindness because she was a woman alone? She'd thought leaving Boston would free her from society's suffocating expectations, but perhaps she'd simply traded one set of constraints for another. Don't let Constance get to you. Eleanor turned to find Martha in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She's tough as old leather, but she's fair. And she's right that the schoolteacher is held to high standards. It's not fair, but it's how things are. You'll be the most educated woman in town, unmarried, and young enough to be seen as a temptation. Some folks will be waiting for you to slip up. That's ridiculous. I'm here to teach, not to... Eleanor stopped, frustrated. I'm not interested in stealing anyone's husband or corrupting anyone's sons. I know that. Most folks will know that once they meet you. But there will always be a few who are suspicious of outsiders, especially educated women who don't fit the usual mold. My advice? Do your job well, treat everyone with respect, and don't give anyone legitimate cause to complain. Beyond that, live your life, Miss Wade. You didn't come all this way to make yourself small for other people's comfort. Eleanor met Martha's eyes and saw understanding there, and compassion, and something like solidarity. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you. Nonsense. You'd have managed. You're stronger than you think. Smiled. Now I need to start preparing dinner. The school board meets at 7, and you should eat something substantial before you face that particular lion's den. The school board meeting was held in a back room of the church, around a large table scarred with years of use. Besides Mrs. Pritchard, there were 4 other members. Reverend Thomas, a kindly-looking man with gentle eyes, Mr. Carson, who owned the general store, Mrs. Henderson, a rancher's wife with capable hands and a warm smile, and Mr. Hoffman, father of the notorious twins, who looked perpetually tired. They questioned Eleanor thoroughly, but not unkindly, asking about her teaching philosophy, her plans for the curriculum, how she'd handle discipline problems. Eleanor answered as honestly as she could, and by the end of the hour she could see approval in most of their faces. Even Mrs. Pritchard looked grudgingly satisfied. All in favor of hiring Miss Eleanor Wade as Prosper Ridge's new school teacher? Reverend Thomas asked. 5 hands rose without hesitation. Then it's settled. Welcome to Prosper Ridge, Miss Wade. We're glad to have you. Eleanor felt relief flood through her so powerfully she nearly wept. It was done. She had a position, a purpose, a place to start building her new life. As the board members stood and began gathering their things, Mr. Carson approached with a friendly smile. Miss Wade, I just wanted to say, don't let anyone intimidate you. These are good kids, even the troublesome ones. They just need someone who believes in them and challenges them. I think you'll do just fine. Thank you, Mr. Carson. That means a great deal. And if you need any supplies for the schoolhouse, just let me know. We keep an account for the school, and I'm always happy to order in anything special you might need. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. I also have a decent selection of books that I could let you borrow for the students. Reading opens worlds, Miss Wade. Even out here on the frontier. Eleanor warmed to him immediately. I'd love to see your selection. Perhaps I could stop by the store tomorrow? Perfect. My Sarah will be there. You've met her at Martha's. She'll take good care of you. He tipped his hat and left, and Eleanor found herself alone with Reverend Thomas, who'd been waiting patiently to speak with her. Miss Wade, I hope you'll join us for services on Sunday. And the social tomorrow evening. I understand Martha has already invited you. It's really the best way to meet the community. I'll be there, Reverend, and yes, I'd be happy to attend services. Wonderful. You know, Miss Crawford used to help with the Sunday school classes. If you'd be interested in continuing that tradition, we'd be most grateful. No pressure, of course. I know you'll have your hands full with regular teaching. I'd be honored, Eleanor said, meaning it. She needed to build connections here, to become part of the community's fabric, and she'd always found comfort in church, even when her faith had been tested by hardship. Walking back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. She had a job. She'd passed the board's scrutiny. She was going to make this work. The evening air was soft and sweet, carrying the scent of prairie grass and distant wood smoke, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Eleanor let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy here. She was almost to Martha's porch when she heard the horse. She turned to see Caleb Rowe riding slowly down the street, his bandaged hand resting on his thigh, his posture suggesting exhaustion. He must have seen her at the same moment, because he changed direction, guiding his horse, Ruby she remembered, toward where Eleanor stood. Miss Wade. He touched the brim of his hat, and even in the fading light, she could see that he looked better than he had the night before. Some of the tension had left his shoulders, and his eyes, though still shadowed, held warmth. I heard the school board met tonight. I assume it went well? How did you... Eleanor started, then laughed. Of course. Small town. Everyone knows everything. Usually before it happens, Caleb agreed with that ghost of a smile she was learning to watch for. So? Are you our official teacher now? I am. I start Monday. Good. He seemed to mean it, seemed genuinely pleased. Those kids need someone like you. Someone who sees them as more than just frontier children, who understands they're capable of more than most folks give them credit for. Eleanor tilted her head, studying him curiously. How do you know what kind of teacher I'll be? We barely know each other. Caleb was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I know you took a needle from a stranger's shaking hands without asking questions or making him feel inadequate. I know you sewed his shirt without hesitation, even though it made you uncomfortable. I know you rode through a storm on a horse with a man you'd just met because it was practical, even though I'm sure every rule of propriety you were ever taught told you not to. That tells me you see people, Miss Wade. You see what's needed, and you do it. That's what makes a good teacher. Eleanor's throat felt tight. You see a great deal for someone who claims we barely know each other. Maybe we know each other better than most people who've been acquainted for years. Maybe some things don't need time to recognize. He shifted in the saddle, and she saw him wince slightly. How's your hand? Hurts like hell, pardon my language, but it'll heal. Always does. Did you change the bandage like Martha told you to? Not yet. I was planning to do it when I got home. Eleanor made a decision before she could second-guess herself. Come inside. Let me check it. I'm not a doctor, but I can at least make sure it's clean and properly wrapped. Caleb looked like he wanted to refuse, and Eleanor could see the war in his expression, pride battling with practicality, stubborn independence fighting against the simple truth that he needed help. Finally, practicality won. All right, thank you. He dismounted with careful movements that suggested more injuries than just his hand, and followed Eleanor up the porch steps. Martha was in the kitchen when they entered, and her eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline when she saw Caleb. Twice in 2 days, Caleb Rowe. People will start to think you live here. Just need my hand checked, Martha. Miss Wade offered, and I'm too tired to argue. Smart man. Sit at the table. I'll get the supplies. Eleanor found herself once again tending to Caleb's wound, this time in the bright light of the kitchen lamp with Martha supervising. The cut looked better than it had the night before. No signs of infection, though it was still angry and red. Eleanor cleaned it gently with the carbolic solution Martha provided, trying not to notice the way Caleb's jaw clenched with pain, the way his right hand gripped the edge of the table hard enough to make his knuckles white. You're very brave, she murmured, wrapping fresh bandages around his palm. Not brave, just accustomed to pain. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Eleanor's heart ached at the casual acceptance in his voice. What kind of life left a man so used to suffering that he barely acknowledged it? There. She tied off the bandage neatly. That should do until you can see Dr. Pritchard tomorrow. You're planning to see him, aren't you? If it'll make you stop worrying, then yes. I'm not worrying. I'm simply being practical. You're worrying. But his tone was warm, almost teasing, and when their eyes met, Eleanor felt that now familiar jolt of connection. And I appreciate it, even if I don't deserve it. Everyone deserves to have someone worry about them, Eleanor said softly. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, something raw and unguarded. Maybe, but not everyone gets that privilege. Martha cleared her throat loudly, breaking the moment. Well, Caleb, since you're here, you might as well stay for supper. I made enough stew to feed a small army, and you look like you haven't eaten properly in days. I couldn't impose. You're not imposing if I'm inviting. Sit, eat. Miss Wade, you set the table. Martha bustled around her kitchen with determined efficiency, clearly brooking no arguments. So Eleanor found herself sitting across from Caleb Rowe at Martha's scarred kitchen table, sharing a simple meal of stew and fresh bread, while Sarah and Emma joined them with undisguised curiosity. The conversation flowed easily, moving from weather to crops to town gossip, and Eleanor was surprised to discover how comfortable she felt, how natural it seemed to be here with these people who'd been strangers just 24 hours ago. Caleb was different in this setting, more relaxed, almost cheerful, trading good-natured barbs with Martha and asking Sarah about her family. Eleanor learned that he was well-liked in the community, that people respected his hard work and his devotion to his sister, that he was the sort of neighbor who showed up when you needed help and never asked for anything in return. Caleb fixed our barn roof last summer, Sarah said warmly. Came over with Mabel and spent 3 days in the blazing heat, wouldn't accept a penny for it. Said neighbors help neighbors, that's just how it works. And when the Peterson baby was sick last winter, Caleb rode through a blizzard to fetch Doc Pritchard, Emma added. Could have died making that ride, but he didn't hesitate. Caleb looked uncomfortable with the praise, his gaze fixed on his bowl. Anyone would have done the same. But not everyone did, Martha said pointedly. You did, Caleb. You always do, which is why folks around here think so highly of you. Eleanor watched him deflect the compliments with practiced ease, and she wondered if he truly didn't see his own worth, or if years of whatever he'd been through had taught him to minimize his goodness, to keep himself small and unnoticed despite the size of his heart. After dinner, Caleb insisted on helping clear the table despite Martha's protests. As he handed Eleanor his empty bowl, their fingers brushed, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, hope, fear, all tangled together. Then he stepped back, creating distance between them, and Eleanor felt the loss of his nearness like a physical ache. "I should go," he said quietly. "It's getting late and I've got an early start tomorrow." "Of course." Eleanor walked him to the door, very aware of Martha and the others watching from the kitchen. "Thank you for dinner, for the conversation. Thank you for checking my hand, and for—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "For being kind, again. You seem to make a habit of it. You seem to need it more than you admit." Caleb's smile was sad. "Maybe. But that doesn't make me a good bet, Miss Wade. I'm damaged goods, as they say. Got more ghosts than a man should carry, and I'm not always sure I'm winning the fight to keep them at bay." Eleanor's heart clenched. "We all have ghosts, Mr. Rowe. Some of us are just better at hiding them." "You got ghosts too?" He asked it softly, intently, as if her answer mattered more than it should. "Everyone who comes west is running from something or toward something," Eleanor said, echoing Mrs. Pritchard's words from earlier. "Usually both." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Then maybe we're more alike than different, Miss Wade. Both of us trying to outrun the past. Both of us hoping the West is big enough to let us start over." "Is it? Big enough?" "Some days I think so. Other days—" He shook his head. "Other days I think the past follows us no matter how far we run. But we keep trying anyway. What else can we do?" Eleanor had no answer to that, so she simply said, "Good night, Mr. Rowe. Take care of that hand." "Good night, Miss Wade. I'll see you at the social tomorrow?" "Yes, I'll be there." He mounted Ruby with careful movements, then sat there for a moment looking down at her, his face half in shadow. "You're going to do well here," he said finally. "At teaching, at building a life. I can feel it. You've got the strength for it." Then he was gone, riding off into the darkness, and Eleanor stood on the porch watching until she couldn't see him anymore, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating too fast, too hard, in a way that spelled danger for all her carefully laid plans to remain uninvolved, uncommitted, safe. Inside, Martha was waiting with that knowing smile, and Eleanor braced herself for teasing or questions. But the older woman simply handed her a cup of tea and said, "Get some rest, dear. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Eleanor lay awake long into the night, listening to the sounds of the frontier settling around her. Distant coyotes, the wind through the eaves, the creak of old wood. She thought about Caleb's words, about ghosts and running and second chances. She thought about his injured hands and sad smile and the way he looked at her like she was something precious and breakable and dangerous all at once. She hadn't come west looking for this, hadn't wanted complications or connections or feelings that made her vulnerable. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. And as Eleanor finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself not quite as afraid of those plans as she should have been. The next evening arrived too quickly. Eleanor spent the day at the schoolhouse, familiarizing herself with the materials and trying to calm her nerves about the social. Martha had helped her press her best dress, a deep blue silk that she'd brought from Boston, one of the few nice things she hadn't sold or abandoned. It made her feel almost like her old self, the girl she'd been before scandal and heartbreak had sent her running west. The church hall was already crowded when they arrived, full of people and noise and the smell of a dozen different dishes brought for the communal supper. Eleanor's stomach churned with anxiety, but Martha steered her confidently into the fray, making introductions left and right until Eleanor's head spun with names and faces. There were the Hendersons, ranchers with 4 children who'd all be in her class. The Petersons, whose baby Caleb had saved during last winter's blizzard. The Carsons from the general store, with their daughter Sarah beaming proudly. The notorious Hoffman family, including twins who looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. Dozens of others, all curious, all assessing, all wondering if this Boston girl would last the winter. Eleanor smiled until her face hurt, answered questions patiently, accepted compliments on her dress with grace. She promised concerned mothers she'd be strict but fair. She assured worried fathers she could handle rough students. She told wide-eyed children that, yes, school would be interesting. No, she wouldn't assign too much homework. And yes, they could call her Miss Wade instead of Miss Eleanor. She was talking with Mrs. Henderson about mathematics curriculum when the room's energy shifted, conversation dimming for just a moment before resuming. Eleanor turned to see Caleb standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands, looking deeply uncomfortable with the attention. He'd cleaned up, wore a pressed shirt and vest, had shaved, had tamed his dark hair. He looked almost formal and heartbreakingly handsome in a way that made Eleanor's breath catch. Behind him came Mabel, radiant in a yellow dress that suited her wild beauty perfectly. The siblings entered together, Mabel immediately sweeping off to join a group of young people her age, while Caleb stood awkwardly scanning the room. His eyes found Eleanor's, and something in his expression eased. He started toward her, and Eleanor was aware of every eye in the room tracking his path, aware of the whispers starting up, aware that whatever happened next would be discussed and dissected and added to the story of the new school teacher and the damaged rancher who'd brought her through the storm. Miss Wade. He stopped in front of her, proper and distant, but his eyes held warmth. Mrs. Henderson, good evening. Caleb. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. I was just telling Miss Wade about our children's mathematical abilities, or lack thereof, in most cases. Numbers are important on a ranch, Caleb agreed. Measuring feed, calculating costs, good practical skills for them to learn. They chatted for a few minutes about education and ranching, but Eleanor was hyper-aware of Caleb's presence beside her, of the way people kept glancing their way, of the speculation she could feel building in the room like pressure before a storm. Mrs. Henderson eventually excused herself, leaving them alone, or as alone as two people could be in a crowded church hall. You look beautiful, Caleb said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. That dress, it's the color of twilight. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Thank you. You look very handsome yourself. I clean up all right when the occasion demands it. He shifted his weight, clearly working up to something. Miss Wade, Eleanor, I was wondering if you might, that is, when the dancing starts, would you do me the honor of a dance? Eleanor's heart began to race. Dancing with him would make a statement, would fuel the gossip, would essentially announce to the entire town that there was something between them, even if neither of them was quite sure what that something was. She should say no, should maintain proper distance, should protect her reputation and her position and all the things she'd worked so hard to secure. Yes, she heard herself say, I'd be honored. The relief in his eyes was profound and worth whatever gossip might follow. They stood together, talking of small things, the weather, the school, his ranch, while around them the social swirled and the future waited. The meal was a chaotic, joyful affair, with long tables laden with food that the entire community had contributed. Eleanor found herself seated between Martha and Mrs. Carson, directly across from Caleb and his sister Mabel. The proximity made her hyper-aware of every movement he made, every glance that passed between them, every small smile that tugged at his lips when their eyes met over the roasted chicken and cornbread. Mabel proved to be delightful company, full of stories about ranch life and local characters that had the whole table laughing. She told Eleanor about the time the Hoffman twins had accidentally set fire to their own outhouse, about the traveling medicine show that had come through last summer selling miracle elixir that turned out to be mostly whiskey, about the dance contest at last year's Harvest Festival that had nearly ended in a brawl when two rival ranchers both claimed victory. You would have loved it, Miss Wade, Mabel said, her eyes dancing with mischief. Half the town taking sides, everyone shouting, and poor Reverend Thomas trying to restore order while the fiddler just kept playing louder and louder. Finally, Mrs. Pritchard marched right into the middle of it all and declared both men were terrible dancers and neither deserved a prize. I can imagine that went over well, Eleanor said dryly. Oh, it was magnificent. Both men were so offended they forgot they were angry at each other and united in being angry at Mrs. Pritchard instead. She solved the whole problem in about 30 seconds. Mabel grinned. That's frontier diplomacy for you. Caleb shook his head, but Eleanor could see the affection in his eyes as he watched his sister. You tell that story like it was entertainment, but I seem to remember you being right in the thick of it, taking bets on who would throw the first punch. I was providing a valuable service, Mabel protested. People need opportunities to invest their money. Besides, I made $3 that night, which you promptly spent on penny candy at Carson's store. Best $3 I ever invested then. Penny candy at Carson's store. Best $3 I ever invested then. That candy lasted me a week. Eleanor found herself laughing along with everyone else, charmed by the sibling dynamic, by the way Caleb's face softened when he looked at Mabel, by the obvious love between them despite their bickering. This was what family looked like, she realized with a pang. This easy affection, this gentle teasing, this foundation of unshakable devotion. She'd never had it with her aunt, had lost it when her parents died, and seeing it now made her ache with longing for something she'd almost forgotten was possible. As if sensing her thoughts, Caleb caught her eye, and the understanding she saw there nearly undid her. He knew what it was like to lose family, to build something from the ashes of grief. He understood the empty spaces in her heart because he carried his own. After dinner, the tables were cleared and pushed to the sides to make room for dancing. A small group of musicians assembled in the corner, a fiddler, a man with a guitar, another with a harmonica, and began tuning their instruments while people milled about, the young people eager to dance, the older folks settling into chairs along the walls to watch and gossip. Eleanor felt her nerves return with full force. Every eye in the room seemed to be on her, waiting to see what she would do, who she would dance with, how the new schoolteacher would comport herself. She saw several young men edging toward her with determined expressions, clearly planning to ask her to dance, and panic fluttered in her chest. She wasn't ready for this, wasn't ready to be on display, wasn't ready to navigate the complicated social politics of a frontier town where every gesture would be analyzed and discussed. Then Caleb was there, appearing at her elbow like he'd sensed her distress. I believe you promised me a dance, Miss Wade, he said quietly, offering his hand. Eleanor took it without hesitation, grateful for the rescue, grateful for the solid warmth of his palm against hers. So I did, Mr. Rowe. He led her to the center of the floor just as the musicians struck up a waltz. It was a bold move, the first dance of the evening, the most visible moment, claiming the new schoolteacher in front of the entire town. Eleanor saw Mrs. Pritchard's eyebrows rise, saw Martha's delighted smile, saw Mabel watching them with an expression that was hard to read. But then Caleb's hand was at her waist, proper and respectful but unmistakably possessive, and Eleanor forgot about everyone else. I should warn you, Caleb murmured as they began to move. I'm not much of a dancer. Never learned properly. If I step on your feet, I apologize in advance. But he was better than he claimed, moving with the same natural grace he showed in everything else, his injured hand resting lightly at her waist while his good hand held hers firmly. They waltzed in silence for several measures, finding their rhythm, adjusting to each other's movements. Eleanor had danced countless times in Boston ballrooms, with polished gentlemen who'd been trained since childhood in proper technique. But none of those dances had felt like this, like coming home, like finding something she hadn't known she was looking for. Thank you, she said softly, for asking me first. I was feeling rather overwhelmed. I could tell. You had that look in your eyes, like a cornered animal deciding whether to fight or flee. His lips quirked in a small smile. Besides, I wasn't about to let Jimmy Patterson or Tom Henderson get to you first. Those boys would have trampled all over your feet and bored you to tears with talk about cattle prices. Eleanor laughed despite herself. And what will you talk about, Mr. Rowe? Anything you want, or nothing at all. Sometimes silence is its own kind of conversation. They danced without speaking for a while, and Eleanor found he was right. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but comfortable, full of unspoken understanding. She was aware of the eyes on them, of the whispers, but they seemed distant and unimportant. What mattered was this moment, this connection, the way Caleb looked at her like she was something precious. Miss Wade, he said finally, his voice low and serious, I want to be honest with you about something. Eleanor's heart began to pound. All right. People are going to talk. About us. About this. About me bringing you through the storm. About us dancing together now. Small towns are like that. They make stories out of nothing, and sometimes those stories become truth whether we want them to or not. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I don't want to cause problems for you. Your position as teacher is important, and I'd never forgive myself if my attention damaged your reputation or made things difficult. Eleanor looked up at him, at the genuine concern in his storm cloud eyes, at the way he was prepared to step back if it would protect her. And something in her chest cracked open, something she'd been keeping carefully locked since Thomas had walked away. Mr. Rowe, Caleb, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't come west to live my life according to what other people think I should do. I came here to be free, to make my own choices, to build something real. She met his gaze steadily. If I want to dance with you, I'll dance with you. And if people want to talk about it, let them talk. Something blazed in his eyes, hope, wonder, and a heat that made Eleanor's breath catch. You're remarkable, he said softly. Do you know that? You're absolutely remarkable. I'm just a woman who's tired of being told what to do and who to be. No, you're so much more than that. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. You're brave and kind and strong, and you see people really see them in a way most folks don't. You took a needle from my shaking hands and didn't ask questions. You came west alone to teach children you'd never met. You stand here dancing with me knowing full well it'll cause gossip, and you don't care because you're living your own truth. That's not just tired, Miss Wade. That's courage. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. No one had spoken to her like this in so long, with respect and admiration, seeing her as a complete person rather than a disappointment or a problem to be solved. Thomas had never looked at her the way Caleb did, had never understood the woman beneath the polished surface. But Caleb saw her, truly saw her, and found her worthy. You're going to make me cry, she whispered. Then I'll stop talking and just dance with you. But he didn't stop talking, not entirely. As they moved around the floor, he told her about his ranch, about the 100 acres he'd bought with money saved from 3 years of working other people's land, about the house he'd built with his own hands, about the small herd of cattle he was slowly growing. He told her about Mabel's dreams of one day opening a dress shop in town, about how smart she was despite having missed years of proper schooling while he'd struggled to establish the ranch. She needs someone like you, he said quietly. Someone who can see past her wildness to the intelligence underneath. She's too old for regular school now, but if you'd be willing to tutor her some, I'd be grateful. I'd be happy to help Mabel, Eleanor interrupted. And I won't take payment for it. Teaching isn't just about the classroom, Caleb. If she wants to learn, I want to teach her. See? Remarkable. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, made him look years younger. She'll be thrilled. Fair warning, though. Mabel can be a handful. She's got opinions about everything and isn't shy about sharing them. I like her already. We need more women out here who aren't afraid to speak their minds. The waltz ended, and Eleanor expected Caleb to escort her back to the sidelines, to let other men have their turn dancing with the new school teacher. But as the musicians struck up another tune, faster this time, something lively and joyful, he simply adjusted his grip and kept dancing with her, and Eleanor didn't protest. Let people talk. Let them speculate and whisper. For the first time in years, she was exactly where she wanted to be. They danced through 2 more songs before social obligation forced them to separate. Caleb released her reluctantly, his fingers trailing across hers as they parted. Thank you, he said simply, for the dances, for everything. Thank you for asking. Then Jimmy Patterson was there, eager and awkward, requesting a dance, and Eleanor had no gracious way to refuse. She danced with Jimmy, then Tom Henderson, then 3 other young men whose names she immediately forgot. They were all perfectly nice, perfectly appropriate, and perfectly boring compared to Caleb. She found her eyes seeking him out across the room, found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin heat, found herself counting the minutes until she could politely extract herself from the endless parade of partners. Mabel appeared during a break between songs, linking her arm through Eleanor's with easy familiarity. Come on, Miss Wade. Let's get some air before you're ambushed by more lovesick cowboys. Half the unmarried men in 3 counties are lined up waiting for their turn. Eleanor let herself be led outside onto the church steps, where the cool night air was a relief after the stuffy hall. Several other women had gathered there, fanning themselves and chatting, but they fell silent when Eleanor and Mabel appeared, their expressions ranging from curious to calculating. "Ladies," Mabel said cheerfully, "have you all met Miss Wade properly? Miss Wade, this is Jenny Morrison, Kate Sullivan, and Alice Chen. They're the closest thing this town has to society mavens, though don't tell them I said that." The 3 women laughed, and Eleanor felt some of the tension ease. Jenny was blonde and pretty, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested a cheerful disposition. Kate was taller, with striking red hair and an assessing gaze. Alice was tiny and delicate, her Chinese heritage evident in her features, and Eleanor was surprised to see her here. She hadn't realized there were Chinese families in Prosper Ridge. "It's lovely to meet you all," Eleanor said sincerely. "We've been dying to properly meet you," Jenny said with a warm smile. "The whole town's been talking about you since we heard you were coming. And now that we've seen you dance with Caleb Rowe 3 times in a row, well, the talk has definitely intensified." Eleanor felt her cheeks heat. "It was hardly—" "Oh, don't apologize," Kate interrupted. "It was the most romantic thing we've seen in ages. Caleb hasn't danced with anyone at a social in the entire 5 years he's been here. To see him out there with you, looking at you like that, honestly, it's made half the women in town swoon with vicarious pleasure." "And the other half?" Eleanor asked warily. "Are plotting how to catch a man of their own," Alice said with a soft laugh. "You've raised the bar, Miss Wade. Now all the single ladies are hoping their beaux will be inspired to show similar devotion." "I'm not sure what you all think you saw," Eleanor said carefully, "but Mr. Rowe was simply being kind, welcoming me to the community." "Oh, honey, no," Jenny said gently. "That wasn't simple kindness. That was a man staking a claim, making sure every other man in that room knew you were spoken for, whether you've admitted it to yourself yet or not." Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. Was it true? Had Caleb been claiming her in his quiet way? And more importantly, how did she feel about that? "Caleb's a good man," Kate said seriously. "One of the best. But he's also complicated, Miss Wade. He's got demons from the war, has nightmares that wake him screaming, gets the shakes when he's stressed. Martha probably told you some of this already. She mentioned he'd been through hardships." "Hardships?" Alice's voice was soft but sad. "That's a gentle word for it. He was at Shiloh, Miss Wade, and Antietam and Gettysburg. He saw things no man should see, did things he can't forget. When he first came here, he was barely holding himself together. Some days, I'm not sure he still isn't." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. She'd known Caleb was a veteran, had seen the evidence of trauma in his shaking hands and haunted eyes. But hearing it stated so baldly, imagining him on those terrible battlefields she'd read about in newspapers, seeing unspeakable horrors, it made her heart ache. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because you deserve to know what you might be getting into," Jenny said gently. "If this thing between you and Caleb develops into something more. He's not an easy man to love, Miss Wade. He's loyal and kind and would die for those he cares about, but he's also damaged in ways that don't just heal. Some women can't handle that. Some have tried and walked away. We just want you to go into this with your eyes open." And also, Mabel's voice came from behind them, sharp with protective anger. "They should tell you that despite everything he's been through, my brother is the best man you'll ever meet. Yes, he has nightmares. Yes, he has days when the shaking is so bad he can barely hold a coffee cup. Yes, he carries scars that go deeper than skin. But he built a ranch from nothing. He raised me when he was barely more than a child himself. He's never once complained about the hand he was dealt. He just gets up every morning and faces the day with more courage than any 10 other men combined." The fierce devotion in Mabel's voice made Eleanor's eyes sting with tears. This girl loved her brother with a fierceness that was beautiful to witness, and she would clearly fight anyone who threatened him. "Mabel, we're not attacking Caleb," Kate said gently. "We're just being honest about the fact that he's damaged goods." Mabel's eyes flashed. "About how the new school teacher should think twice before getting involved with the broken veteran. I heard you, Kate Sullivan, and I don't appreciate it. That's not what we meant, Jenny protested. Isn't it? Mabel turned to Eleanor, her expression fierce. Miss Wade, my brother is the best man I know. If you can't see that, if his scars are too much for you, then you should walk away now. He doesn't need another person who looks at him with pity or fear. But if you can see past the damage to the man underneath, if you can understand that surviving doesn't make you broken, it makes you strong, then you should know that he's worth every bit of complicated that comes with him. Eleanor held Mabel's gaze steadily. I don't pity your brother, Mabel. I admire him. And I don't think surviving trauma makes a person broken. I think it makes them human. She glanced at the other women. I appreciate your concern, truly, but I'm not some fragile flower who needs protecting from reality. I know Caleb has been through terrible things. I know he carries scars. But so do I. So does everyone who's come west looking for a second chance. We're all damaged in our own ways. The question isn't whether someone is perfect. It's whether they're trying to be better, whether they treat people with kindness, whether they have the courage to keep going even when it's hard. And from what I've seen, Caleb Rowe has more of those qualities than anyone I've ever met. The silence that followed was profound. Then Mabel's fierce expression melted into a brilliant smile. I knew I liked you, Miss Wade. I knew it the moment Caleb came home yesterday morning and couldn't stop talking about the Boston lady who'd sewn his shirt without making him feel like less of a man. He talked about me? Oh, honey, he hasn't stopped talking about you, Jenny said with a laugh. According to Tom Henderson, who ran into Caleb at the feed store this afternoon, your name came up approximately 15 times in a 10-minute conversation about grain prices. Eleanor felt warmth flood through her, sweet and dangerous. Caleb had been thinking about her, talking about her, unable to stop himself from mentioning her name even in the most mundane conversations. It meant something. It had to mean something. Well, Kate said with a smile that held a hint of apology, I can see we were worried for nothing. You're made of sterner stuff than we gave you credit for, Miss Wade. Welcome to Prosper Ridge. I think you're going to fit in just fine. And for what it's worth, Alice added softly, I think you and Caleb are good for each other. He needs someone who sees him clearly without judgment, and you need someone who understands about running from the past. Maybe you can help each other heal. Before Eleanor could respond, the church door opened and Reverend Thomas appeared. Ladies, we're about to start the final dance of the evening. You might want to come back inside if you don't want to miss it. They filed back into the hall, which had grown warmer and more convivial as the evening progressed. The musicians were tuning up for one last song, and couples were already pairing off. Eleanor found herself scanning the room for Caleb, her heart lifting when she spotted him leaning against the far wall, deep in conversation with Mr. Henderson. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded room. He excused himself from Mr. Henderson and began making his way toward her, and Eleanor felt her pulse quicken with each step he took. This was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, not a girl with her first crush. But there was something about Caleb Rowe that bypassed all her carefully constructed defenses, that made her feel things she'd promised herself she wouldn't feel again. One more dance yet? He asked when he reached her, and Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. This time, as they took their places on the floor, Eleanor was hyper-aware of every point of contact, his hand at her waist, her hand in his, the careful distance he maintained even as his eyes told her he wanted to be closer. The musicians began playing something slow and sweet, a melody that seemed to wrap around them like a cocoon, separating them from the rest of the world. I saw you outside with Mabel and the others, Caleb said quietly. I hope they weren't giving you a hard time about us. They were concerned, protective of you. It's nice, actually, knowing that people here care about you that much. And what did you tell them when they expressed their concerns? Eleanor met his eyes directly. I told them that everyone has scars and surviving doesn't make you broken. I told them that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about facing each day despite the fear. And I told them that you're one of the most remarkable men I've ever met. Caleb's breath caught audibly. Eleanor, he said, her name a prayer on his lips, I need to tell you something. Need you to understand something before this goes any further. All right. He was silent for several measures, clearly struggling with what to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with emotion. I came back from the war half a man. Not physically, though God knows I left pieces of myself on those battlefields, but mentally, spiritually. I had nightmares so bad I'd wake up screaming, thinking I was back in the trenches. My hands shook so much I couldn't hold a gun, couldn't work properly, couldn't do anything without being reminded that I was broken. Eleanor started to speak, to protest his use of that word, but he shook his head. Let me finish, please. He took a breath. I came west because I couldn't stand the pity in people's eyes back home. Couldn't stand being treated like a piece of damaged goods, like something to be handled carefully lest I shatter. I needed to prove to myself that I was still a man, still capable of building something, still worth the space I took up in the world. And for 5 years I've been doing that, working myself half to death, building the ranch, raising Mabel, trying to outrun the ghosts that follow me. Caleb, I'm not finished. His eyes were fierce now, almost desperate. Then you walked into that station in the storm, and you took the needle from my shaking hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. You didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, didn't treat me like I was something fragile or frightening. You just saw a task that needed doing and did it. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt like maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. Maybe there was someone who could look at me and see a man instead of a collection of scars. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. You are a man, Caleb. A good one. The trauma you survived doesn't define you. How you've responded to it does. And what I see when I look at you is someone brave and kind and so much stronger than you know. I have nightmares, he said bluntly. Most nights. I wake up shouting, sometimes thinking I'm back in battle. The shaking gets worse when I'm stressed or tired. Sometimes I can't be touched without flinching. Sometimes I need to be alone because the world is too much and I can't breathe. I'm telling you this because if there's going to be something between us, and I desperately hope there will be, you need to know what you're signing up for. Do you want to know what I'm signing up for, Caleb? Eleanor asked softly. They'd stopped dancing now, standing still in the middle of the floor while other couples swirled around them. I'm signing up for honesty. For someone who tells me the truth even when it's hard. I'm signing up for courage. The courage to face each day despite the battles you're fighting. I'm signing up for kindness and loyalty and a man who raises his sister with love and rides through storms to help strangers. That's what I see when I look at you. Not the nightmares or the shaking hands or the scars. I see you, Caleb, the man you are despite everything. The man you are because of everything. Something broke in his expression, something that looked like hope warring with disbelief. You mean that? I mean it. Eleanor, He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. I reckon I'm already half in love with you, and that terrifies me more than any battlefield ever did. Because loving someone means giving them the power to hurt you, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive that kind of wound. Eleanor's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Love. He'd said love. This man who'd known her for less than 48 hours, who danced with her at a church social and let her sew his shirt, was standing here confessing to falling in love with her. It was too fast, too soon, too impossible, and yet it didn't feel impossible at all. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Then we're both guilty, she whispered, echoing the words from her dreams, the words she'd imagined saying to someone someday. Because I'm falling too, Caleb. Faster than I should, faster than makes any sense, but I can't seem to stop it. His hand tightened at her waist, his eyes blazing with emotion. I want to kiss you, he said roughly. Right here, in front of everyone. I want to make it clear that you're mine, and I'm yours, and anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me. Eleanor's breath caught. But you won't. But I won't, because you're the school teacher, and you have a reputation to maintain, and I won't do anything that might jeopardize the life you're building here. His jaw clenched with the effort of restraint. But God, Eleanor, I want to. Someday, she said softly, a promise and a hope. Someday soon you can kiss me all you want. When we're not in front of the entire town, when it won't cause scandal, when it's just us and the truth between us. Someday soon, he agreed. and the look in his eyes made Eleanor shiver with anticipation. The song ended, and reality intruded once more. People were staring, had clearly noticed their intense conversation, their stillness, while everyone else danced. Eleanor could see Mrs. Pritchard watching with narrowed eyes, could see Martha beaming with undisguised delight, could see Mabel grinning like she'd just won a significant bet. Caleb escorted Eleanor back to where Martha stood, proper and distant once more, though Eleanor could still feel the warmth of his touch long after he'd released her hand. "Thank you for the dances, Miss Wade," he said formally. "It was a pleasure." "The pleasure was mine, Mr. Rowe." He nodded to Martha, retrieved Mabel from her group of friends, and left. Eleanor watched him go, her heart full to bursting with feelings she wasn't sure she had names for yet. Everything had changed tonight. The whole trajectory of her new life had shifted on its axis, tilted toward this complicated, courageous man with storm-cloud eyes and a heart full of scars. "Well," Martha said with profound satisfaction, "that was quite a display." Was it terribly inappropriate? Probably, but it was also honest and real and exactly what this town needed to see. You're not here to be a prim schoolmarm with no life of her own, Eleanor. You're here to be a whole person, to build a life that includes teaching but isn't limited to it. And if that life includes Caleb Rowe, well, I can't think of a better match. "It's too fast," Eleanor protested weakly. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes people just fit, dear. Sometimes you meet someone and you know, deep in your bones, that this is right. This is meant to be. Don't talk yourself out of it just because it doesn't follow the usual timeline." Martha patted her arm. "Now come on. We should get home before the gossips corner us and demand details." That night, lying in her narrow bed at Martha's boarding house, Eleanor replayed every moment of the evening, every word Caleb had spoken, every look they'd shared, every touch that had sent electricity through her veins. He was falling in love with her. She was falling in love with him. It was reckless and irrational and probably doomed to cause complications she couldn't yet foresee. But for the first time since Thomas had broken her heart, since scandal had driven her from Boston, since she'd stepped onto that westbound train with nothing but a trunk and desperate hope, Eleanor felt truly alive. Felt like the future might hold something beautiful instead of just survival. Felt like maybe, just maybe, the storm that had brought her west had been leading her home all along. Sunday dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for church services. Eleanor dressed carefully in her most modest dress, pinned her hair up severely, and tried to look like a proper school teacher instead of a woman who'd spent half the night dreaming about storm-cloud eyes and calloused hands. The church was packed, every pew filled with families in their Sunday best. Eleanor sat with Martha near the front, hyper-aware of Caleb and Mabel several rows back. She could feel his presence like a physical warmth against her spine, and it took all her willpower not to turn around and look at him. Reverend Thomas's sermon was about forgiveness and second chances, about how God's grace extended to all who sought it, no matter their past mistakes or present struggles. Eleanor found herself wondering if the Reverend had chosen this topic deliberately, if he somehow knew about the lost souls gathered in his church. The veterans haunted by war, the women fleeing scandal, the men and women who'd come west looking for redemption. After the service, the congregation spilled out into the sunshine, gathering in small groups to chat. Eleanor was immediately surrounded by parents wanting to discuss their children's education, and she answered their questions patiently, all while tracking Caleb's movements in her peripheral vision. He was talking with several other ranchers, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him, occasionally glancing her way with barely concealed longing. "Miss Wade, might I have a word?" Eleanor turned to find Mrs. Pritchard standing there, her expression unreadable. The older woman gestured toward a quiet corner of the churchyard, away from the crowds, and Eleanor followed with a sinking feeling in her stomach. Here it came. The lecture about propriety, the warning about getting too close to Caleb Rowe, the reminder that school teachers were held to higher standards. But Mrs. Pritchard surprised her. "I owe you an apology, Miss Wade," she said without preamble. "I was perhaps too harsh the other day when I warned you about maintaining propriety. After watching you at the social last night, seeing how you conducted yourself with grace and dignity despite considerable attention, I realize I underestimated you." Eleanor blinked, surprised. "Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard." "Don't thank me yet. I'm about to offer some advice that may sound interfering, but it comes from a place of concern. The older woman paused, choosing her words carefully. Caleb Rowe is a good man, one of the best I've known. My husband treated him when he first arrived in Prosper Ridge, and I've seen firsthand how far he's come from the early days. If you care for him, and it was obvious last night that you do, then you should know that he needs someone strong, someone who won't be frightened by his demons, who won't run when things get difficult. Can you be that person, Miss Wade? Eleanor met Mrs. Pritchard's sharp gaze steadily. I can try. That's all any of us can do. Try our best and hope it's enough. A reasonable answer. Better than false promises. Mrs. Pritchard nodded. Then I'll say this. Court him if you want to. Get to know him properly. But do it carefully for both your sakes. This town is watching, and while most folks are rooting for you both, there will always be those who disapprove or who want to cause trouble. Be smart about how you conduct your relationship, and for God's sake, don't give anyone legitimate ammunition to use against you. I understand. Good. Now, my husband wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to help organize a health education program for the older students. Nothing elaborate, just basic information about hygiene and preventing disease. Many of these children don't have access to such knowledge, and it could save lives. They talked for several minutes about the proposal, and by the time Eleanor returned to the main group, most people had already dispersed. But Caleb was still there, leaning against the church fence, clearly waiting. Mabel stood nearby, talking animatedly with a group of young women, but keeping one eye on her brother. Miss Wade, Caleb said, pushing off from the fence as she approached. I was wondering if you might like to see the schoolhouse garden. I helped build the beds last spring, and I thought you might want to know what's been planted there. It was a transparent excuse to get her alone, and they both knew it. Eleanor glanced around, saw Martha watching with an encouraging smile, saw Mrs. Pritchard give an almost imperceptible nod. I'd like that very much, Mr. Rowe. They walked the short distance to the schoolhouse in companionable silence, Mabel trailing behind them as an impromptu chaperone. The garden was on the south side of the building, 3 raised beds full of vegetables and herbs that the previous teacher had used for lessons on botany and growing food. The tomatoes are doing well, Caleb observed unnecessarily, since the robust plants were clearly thriving. And the beans! You could use them for teaching, mathematics, science, responsibility. The children take turns watering and weeding. That's wonderful, Eleanor said, though she was far more interested in being near Caleb than in discussing garden vegetables. Mabel, bless her, had stopped to examine something at the far end of the garden, giving them a moment of relative privacy. Caleb turned to Eleanor, his expression serious. I meant what I said last night, he began. All of it. But I also want you to know that I'm not expecting anything from you. Not promises, not commitments, nothing you're not ready to give. We can take this as slowly as you need. I've waited 5 years to feel something other than broken. I can wait as long as it takes for you to be sure. Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. What if I'm already sure? What if I don't want to wait? Then we still take it slow because that's the smart thing to do. Because you've just arrived, just started your position, just begun building your life here. Because I want to do this right, Eleanor. I want to court you properly with respect and patience. I want to give us the best possible chance of lasting. Court me, Eleanor repeated, testing the word. That sounds very formal. It is formal. That's the point. Caleb glanced toward Mabel, making sure she was still occupied, then stepped closer to Eleanor, lowering his voice. I want to call on you at the boarding house. Take you on proper outings, picnics maybe, or rides to see the ranch. Have conversations where we get to know each other beyond the attraction we both feel. I want to do this the right way, so that when I finally do kiss you, and I will kiss you, Eleanor Wade, make no mistake about that, it'll be because we've built something real and lasting. Eleanor's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. That sounds perfect. Does it? You're not disappointed that I'm not sweeping you off your feet, making grand romantic gestures? Caleb, you carried me through a storm on horseback and danced with me 3 times at a church social despite the entire town watching. If that's not romantic, I don't know what is. She smiled up at him, letting all the affection she felt show in her expression. I don't need grand gestures. I need honesty and respect and someone who sees me as a partner, not a prize. And that's exactly what you're offering. Then may I call on you this week? Perhaps Wednesday evening? I'd be honored. They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Mabel returned, looking far too pleased with herself. Done looking at vegetables? Good, because I'm starving, and Caleb promised to buy me lunch at the cafe if I played chaperone without complaining. I don't remember making that promise, Caleb protested mildly. You did, just now, telepathically. Mabel linked her arm through Eleanor's with easy familiarity. Miss Wade, you should join us, unless that would be too scandalous. Eleanor glanced at Caleb, saw the hope in his eyes, and made a decision. I'd love to join you, though perhaps we should invite Martha as well, to maintain proper appearances. Smart thinking, Caleb approved. Mabel, run back and ask Mrs. Henshaw if she'd like to join us for lunch. Tell her it's my treat. As Mabel raced off, Eleanor and Caleb stood together in the schoolhouse garden, surrounded by growing things and possibility. The future stretched before them, uncertain and potentially difficult, but also full of promise. This is really happening, Eleanor said softly. We're really doing this. We're really doing this, Caleb agreed. And I have to tell you, Miss Wade, I haven't felt this hopeful about anything in a very long time. Neither have I, Mr. Rowe. Neither have I. They walked back to meet the others, and as they went, Eleanor felt the last pieces of her broken heart beginning to knit back together. She'd come west looking for escape, for freedom, for a fresh start, but she was finding something far more valuable: a home, a purpose, and a man who saw her scars and loved her anyway. A man who understood that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about having the courage to build a future despite it. The cafe was a modest establishment on Main Street, with checkered curtains in the windows and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the door. Martha had accepted the invitation with barely concealed delight, and now the four of them sat around a corner table while the proprietor, a stout German woman named Mrs. Schultz, fussed over them with maternal efficiency. The new teacher, ja? Mrs. Schultz beamed at Eleanor, setting down plates of roast chicken and potatoes. My Heinrich, he is so excited for school to start. He is 8 years old and wants to learn everything. You will be good to him, yes? I'll do my best, Eleanor promised, charmed by the woman's enthusiasm. She speaks 5 languages, Mabel announced proudly, as if Eleanor were her personal discovery. English, French, Latin, a bit of German, and some Greek. Can you imagine? All those words in one head. 4 languages, Eleanor corrected gently. My German is quite poor and my Greek is limited to classical texts. Hardly conversational. Still more than most of us, Caleb said quietly. Mabel's right to be impressed. They ate companionably, the conversation flowing easily between the 4 of them. Martha entertained them with stories about the boarding house's more colorful residents over the years, while Mabel peppered Eleanor with questions about Boston. What the buildings looked like, whether she'd ever seen the ocean, what ladies wore to fancy parties. Eleanor found herself describing a world that seemed increasingly distant and unreal, a life that had belonged to someone else entirely. It sounds so grand, Mabel sighed wistfully. All those balls and theaters and museums. Don't you miss it terribly? Eleanor considered the question carefully, aware of Caleb watching her, reading meaning into every word. I miss some things, she admitted. The libraries, mostly. Access to books and culture. But the rest of it, the society, the rules, the constant judgment, I don't miss that at all. I felt suffocated there, Mabel, like I was slowly disappearing into what everyone else expected me to be. Out here, I can breathe. Even though it's dusty and hot and sometimes smells like cattle, Mabel teased. Even though all of that, there's an honesty to frontier life that I find refreshing. People say what they mean. They judge you on your actions, not your family connections or the quality of your dress. It's liberating. She's right, Martha said, reaching over to pat Eleanor's hand. That's why so many of us love it here, despite the hardships. We get to be ourselves, not some version of ourselves that fits into someone else's narrow definition of proper. Caleb had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke, his voice thoughtful. Though there are still rules out here, Eleanor. Different ones, maybe, but just as rigid in their own way. Frontier society has expectations, too. about how women should behave, about what's proper for a school teacher, about who can be with whom. Don't romanticize it too much. Eleanor met his eyes, understanding the warning beneath his words. He was reminding her that their courtship would still face scrutiny, that her position as teacher would still require careful navigation, that freedom was always relative. "I know," she said softly, "but at least out here, I feel like I have a fighting chance of living on my own terms. Back in Boston, that door was permanently closed." "What happened?" Mabel asked, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry, that was rude. You don't have to answer that." Eleanor glanced at Martha, who gave her an encouraging nod. These people had been honest with her about Caleb's past, about his struggles and demons. Perhaps she owed them the same honesty about her own. "I was engaged," she said quietly, "to a man named Thomas Montgomery, son of a prominent banking family. We'd been courting for nearly 2 years, and I believed he loved me. But when my uncle was accused of embezzlement and our family name became associated with scandal, Thomas ended the engagement immediately. Didn't even do it himself, sent his father to inform my aunt that the arrangement was no longer suitable." Mabel's eyes flashed with anger. What a coward! "That's what I thought too, but more than that, I felt like a fool. I'd trusted him, had been planning a life with him, and at the first sign of trouble he abandoned me without a second thought. And suddenly, all of Boston society that had welcomed me was closed off. No one would hire me to teach their daughters. No one would invite me to their homes. I was tainted by association, guilty without trial." Eleanor took a breath, surprised by how much easier it was to tell this story now, with distance and perspective. "So when I saw the advertisement for a school teacher in Wyoming, I applied immediately. I needed to go somewhere no one knew my family name, somewhere I could start fresh without the weight of other people's judgments." "Your uncle," Caleb asked gently, "was he guilty?" "I don't know. He died before the trial and the truth died with him. But it didn't matter. The accusation was enough to destroy everything. That's what I learned in Boston. The truth matters less than what people believe to be true." Martha reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Well, out here, we judge people by what we see them do, not by what we hear others say they did. You've shown yourself to be kind, intelligent, and brave. That's enough for us." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, feeling tears prick her eyes. "That means more than you know." Caleb was looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch, understanding and admiration and something deeper, something that promised he would never walk away the way Thomas had, that he knew what it meant to be judged unfairly and found wanting through no fault of your own. "We match," he said softly, so only she could hear. "Both of us carrying scars from battles we didn't choose. Both of us trying to build something new from the ruins of what was." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Yes, they matched. Two broken people who'd somehow found each other in the vastness of the frontier, who recognized in each other the courage it took to keep going when everything said to give up. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly, and by the time they finished, Eleanor felt more settled in her new life than she had since arriving. She had friends now, real friends, not just social acquaintances. She had a job she was excited about. And she had Caleb, whatever that meant, whatever they were building together. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Schultz insisted on sending Eleanor home with a loaf of fresh bread. "For your first day of teaching tomorrow," the older woman said warmly. "You eat good breakfast, teach good lessons, ja?" Eleanor accepted the bread with gratitude, touched by the kindness. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of prairie grass. Caleb walked them back toward the boarding house, leading Ruby by the reins, Mabel chattering happily beside him. "Miss Wade," Mabel said suddenly, "Caleb mentioned you might be willing to tutor me. Were you serious about that?" "Completely serious. What would you like to study?" Mabel's face lit up. "Everything, but especially mathematics and literature. I can read well enough," Caleb made sure of that, "but I want to understand poetry and novels the way educated people do. And I want to learn advanced mathematics because I'm planning to open a business someday, and I'll need to manage accounts and finances." "A dress shop, you said?" "Eventually. Right now, I help Caleb with the ranch, but I'm saving money. In a few years, I want to open the finest dress shop in the territory. I'll make custom gowns for ladies who want something better than catalog orders, and I'll hire local girls to help so they can learn a trade. Mabel's eyes shone with ambition and determination. Everyone tells me it's an impossible dream for a ranch girl with no connections, but Caleb always says the impossible just takes longer. Eleanor looked at Caleb, who was watching his sister with obvious pride. That's wonderful advice. It's the truth, he said simply. Mabel's smart and driven. She'll make her dream happen if she sets her mind to it. I just want to make sure she has the education to back up her ambition. Then we'll start this week, Eleanor decided.
Trump sazes.
By the schoolhouse after classes end on Tuesday and Thursday. We'll work on whatever you want to learn. And Mabel, I think your dream is not only possible, but probable. You have exactly the kind of determination that succeeds out here. Mabel's response was to throw her arms around Eleanor in an impulsive hug that nearly knocked her off balance. Thank you, Miss Wade. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means to me. Over Mabel's shoulder, Eleanor caught Caleb's eye and saw gratitude there so profound it made her chest ache. This was what he'd been unable to give his sister, access to the kind of education that would help her build the life she dreamed of. And now Eleanor could provide it, could help this fierce, bright girl become everything she was capable of being. When they reached the boarding house, Caleb handed Ruby's reins to Mabel. Take her home and get started on the evening chores. I'll be along shortly. Mabel grinned knowingly. Sure, Caleb. Take your time. All the time you need. She mounted with fluid grace and rode off, leaving Caleb and Eleanor standing awkwardly on the porch, with Martha as their very obvious chaperone. I should go inside, Martha said with exaggerated casualness. I have so many things to do. So many things. You two take your time saying goodbye. I'll be inside, doing things. She disappeared through the door, and Eleanor couldn't help but laugh. She's not subtle, is she? Not even a little bit. Caleb smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face. But her heart's in the right place. She wants people to be happy. They stood together in the afternoon sunshine, and Eleanor was struck by how natural this felt, standing with Caleb, talking about nothing and everything, feeling like she'd known him for years instead of days. The connection between them was undeniable, almost tangible, and she could see in his eyes that he felt it too. So, he said softly, Wednesday evening? I could pick you up around 6, bring a picnic supper, show you some of the countryside? That sounds perfect. And maybe... He hesitated, then continued, maybe you could come out to the ranch sometime soon. Meet Mabel properly in her own environment, see where we live. I want you to understand all of it, what my life looks like, what you'd be taking on if this thing between us continues. Eleanor's heart swelled at his honesty, at his determination to lay everything bare before they went any further. I'd like that very much. Perhaps next Sunday, after church. Next Sunday it is. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her time to step back if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he took her hand in his rough palm warm against her skin. Eleanor, I want to do this right. I want to build something real with you, something that lasts. That means being patient, being careful, being honest about everything, the good and the bad. Can you be patient with me? As patient as you need me to be, she promised. We have time, Caleb, all the time we need. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. It was chaste, proper, entirely appropriate. And yet it sent heat flooding through Eleanor's entire body, made her knees weak and her heart race. When he released her hand, she had to resist the urge to pull him back, to demand more than this careful courtship allowed. Wednesday, he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Wednesday, she agreed. He mounted Ruby and rode away, and Eleanor stood watching until he disappeared around the corner, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. Behind her, she heard the door creak open and Martha's amused voice. Well, that was the most romantic thing I've seen in all my years. That man is utterly smitten with you, dear. Eleanor turned to find Martha grinning like she'd just witnessed the social event of the season. It's happening very fast. Sometimes that's how it works. When it's right, and no amount of caution or patience can change that. Martha held the door open invitingly. Come on, you need to rest up. Tomorrow's your first day of teaching, and you'll want to be at your best. Eleanor let herself be ushered inside, but sleep proved elusive that night despite her exhaustion. She kept replaying every moment of the day, every word Caleb had spoken, every look they'd shared. She thought about the promises they'd made to take things slowly, about the life that might be possible if they could navigate all the obstacles in their path. She also thought about teaching, about the 32 children who would be in her care starting tomorrow, about the responsibility and opportunity that represented. This was what she'd come west for, a chance to make a real difference, to shape young minds and help build the foundation of a growing community. The romance with Caleb was unexpected, wonderful, but it couldn't be allowed to overshadow her primary purpose here. Monday morning dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Eleanor dressed with extra care in her most professional dress, pinned her hair up severely, and tried to project confidence she wasn't entirely sure she felt. Martha pressed a good breakfast on her despite her protests that she was too nervous to eat, and by the time Eleanor walked to the schoolhouse, she felt as ready as she'd ever be. The children were already gathering in the yard when she arrived, a diverse collection of ages and sizes, all eyeing her with frank curiosity. Some looked excited, some apprehensive, some openly skeptical. The infamous Hoffman twins stood apart from the rest, identical boys with sandy hair and matching expressions of challenge. They had to be the 15-year-olds Martha had warned her about. Eleanor took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and rang the bell. The first few hours were controlled chaos as she worked to establish routine and expectations. She learned names: Tommy Peterson, the 6-year-old with bright blue eyes; Sarah Henderson, a thoughtful 12-year-old who loved to read; little Mei Chen, Alice's daughter, who was shy but clearly intelligent; the Hoffman twins, Jake and Jesse, who tested her immediately by accidentally knocking over the water bucket. Eleanor handled it calmly, asking them to mop up the mess and informing them that tomorrow they'd be responsible for filling the bucket before school started. She saw surprise flicker in their eyes. They'd expected anger or harsh punishment, not practical consequences delivered without emotion. By lunchtime, she'd made it through basic assessments to understand each child's skill level, and she was both encouraged and dismayed by what she found. Some of the children were quite advanced, clearly having been well taught by Miss Crawford. Others could barely read or do basic arithmetic, having been kept home for farm work during crucial years. The range was enormous, and teaching them all in one classroom was going to be a significant challenge. But it was a challenge Eleanor found herself eager to meet. As she watched the children eat their lunches in the schoolyard, some of them already warming to her, she felt a deep sense of purpose. These children deserved the best education she could provide, deserved someone who saw their potential and pushed them to achieve it. The afternoon went more smoothly than the morning. Eleanor set the older students to working on composition assignments while she worked with the younger ones on basic reading. She made sure to circulate, to give everyone individual attention, to praise effort and improvement rather than just perfect performance. By the time she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, she was exhausted but satisfied. It had been a good first day. Most of the children scattered immediately, eager to return to their homes and chores, but little Mei Chen lingered, approaching Eleanor's desk shyly. "Miss Wade, my mama wanted me to ask if you'd like to come to dinner sometime. She said you help Mr. Rowe and that makes you family friend." Eleanor's heart melted at the careful English, at the child's earnest expression. "I'd be honored, May. Please tell your mother yes, and she can let me know when would be convenient. She also said I should work extra hard for you because you're a good teacher. She can tell these things. Your mother is very wise. And May, you did excellent work today. I'm looking forward to teaching you this year." The girl beamed and ran off, and Eleanor began straightening the classroom, erasing the chalkboard and organizing papers. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the door open, didn't realize anyone had entered until a male voice said, "Miss Wade?" She turned to find one of the local ranchers, a man she'd been introduced to at the social, but whose name she couldn't immediately recall. He was perhaps 40, weathered and lean, with calculating eyes that made her uncomfortable. "Mr. I'm sorry. I don't recall your name. Garrett, Jim Garrett. I ranch south of town. He moved closer, and Eleanor felt herself tense. I wanted to welcome you to Prosper Ridge proper, see how your first day went. That's very kind. It went well, thank you. Good, good. He was standing too close now, well inside the boundaries of appropriate distance. You know, a pretty young woman like you, all alone in a new town, you must get lonely sometimes. If you ever need company, someone to show you around, I'd be happy to oblige. Eleanor's stomach clenched with unease. She'd dealt with men like this before, men who saw a woman alone as an opportunity, who mistook kindness for invitation. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Garrett, but I'm quite settled. Mrs. Henshaw has been wonderfully welcoming, and I've already made several friends in town. Friends like Caleb Rowe? His tone had sharpened, and Eleanor saw something unpleasant flicker in his eyes. Saw you two getting mighty cozy at the social, dancing 3 times, talking outside the church. Folks are wondering what your intentions are with him. Eleanor felt anger flare hot in her chest. My intentions, Mr. Garrett, are my own business, as are Mr. Rowe's. I don't believe either of us answers to town gossip. Just looking out for you, Miss Wade. Caleb Rowe's a broken man. Got the shakes, has nightmares, can't hold a gun steady. Some say he's touched in the head from the war. A respectable woman like you, a teacher, you should be setting your sights higher than damaged goods. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow, not because they hurt her, but because they revealed such callous cruelty toward Caleb. Mr. Garrett, I think you should leave now. Now don't get upset. I'm just being honest. You're new here. You don't know the whole story. Caleb Rowe came back from that war half a man, and he's been barely holding it together ever since. You deserve better than... Mr. Garrett. Eleanor's voice was ice cold now, her Boston finishing school training coming to the fore. Caleb Rowe is one of the finest men I've ever met. The fact that he survived terrible trauma and built a life despite it speaks to his strength, not his weakness. And the fact that you would speak of a fellow rancher and neighbor in such terms speaks far more poorly of your character than his. Now I'm going to ask you one more time to leave. If you refuse, I'll walk to Dr. Pritchard's house right now and tell him that a man is making me uncomfortable in my workplace. Garrett's face flushed red with anger. You're making a mistake, Miss Wade. Rowe's not what you think he is. And when you figure that out, don't come crying to me. He stalked out, slamming the door behind him, and Eleanor sank into her chair, her hands shaking with suppressed rage. How dare he? How dare he speak of Caleb that way, as if surviving trauma somehow made him less of a man, as if the shaking and the nightmares were character flaws rather than battle scars. She sat there for several minutes, trying to calm herself, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, she gathered her things and locked up the schoolhouse, walking quickly back to the boarding house. She needed to tell someone what Garrett had said, needed to make sure people knew he'd come to the school, needed to protect herself from whatever rumors he might spread. Martha was in the kitchen when Eleanor burst through the door, and the older woman took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" Eleanor told her everything, her voice shaking with anger. When she finished, Martha's expression was grim. Jim Garrett's always been trouble. His wife left him 2 years ago, took their children and went back east, said she couldn't stand his temper anymore. He's been bitter ever since, and he's made no secret of the fact that he thinks Caleb Rowe's ranch should have gone to him instead. At Eleanor's confused look, Martha explained. The land Caleb bought, Garrett wanted it, thought he'd made a deal with the previous owner. When the owner sold to Caleb instead, Garrett took it as a personal insult. He's been looking for ways to undermine Caleb ever since. That's petty and cruel. That's Jim Garrett, and now he's decided the best way to hurt Caleb is through you. Martha sat down heavily. Eleanor, you need to be careful. Garrett's got influence with some of the ranchers, and he could cause real problems if he decides to make an issue of your relationship with Caleb. There's nothing inappropriate about our relationship. We've been entirely proper. I know that. You know that. But Garrett doesn't care about the truth. He cares about causing trouble. And a school teacher courting anyone is always going to be subject to scrutiny, especially if that someone is a man Garrett has a grudge against. Eleanor felt tears of frustration prick her eyes. So what am I supposed to do? Stop seeing Caleb because some bitter man wants to make trouble? No, honey, you keep seeing Caleb if that's what you want. But you be smart about it. You keep everything proper and above board. You make sure there's always a chaperone. You don't give Garrett or anyone else ammunition to use against you. And you make damn sure that when Caleb finds out about this, and he will find out, he doesn't go over to Garrett's place and do something stupid. I have to tell him? You have to tell him. He needs to know that Garrett's targeting you to get at him, and he needs to hear it from you, not from town gossip. Martha reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. But wait until Wednesday when he comes calling. Tell him then, in private, when he's had time to calm down from his day's work, and when there are witnesses to make sure he doesn't immediately ride off to confront Garrett. Eleanor nodded, seeing the wisdom in this advice, even as her heart sank at the complication. She'd known that her relationship with Caleb would face challenges, but she hadn't expected them to come so soon or so viciously. The next 2 days passed in a blur of teaching and lesson planning. The children were settling into routine, and Eleanor was pleased with their progress. Even the Hoffman twins seemed to be grudgingly accepting her authority, though she suspected they were simply biding their time before attempting another test of her patience. Tuesday afternoon, true to her word, Mabel arrived for her first tutoring session. They spent an hour working through advanced mathematics, and Eleanor was impressed by Mabel's quick grasp of concepts and her determination to master even the most challenging problems. "You have a natural aptitude for this," Eleanor told her as they finished for the day. "With dedicated study, you could easily manage business accounts and finances." Mabel glowed with the praise. "Really? You're not just saying that to be nice?" "I never say things just to be nice, especially not about education. You're genuinely talented, Mabel. Don't let anyone tell you differently." As Mabel prepared to leave, she hesitated, then said, "Miss Wade, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you in love with my brother?" The blunt question caught Eleanor off guard. She considered deflecting, giving some non-answer that would preserve propriety, but Mabel deserved honesty. "I think I might be," she admitted quietly. "It's very fast, and I'm trying not to rush into anything, but yes, I think I'm falling in love with him." Mabel's smile was radiant. "Good. Because he's already completely in love with you. I can tell. He gets this look in his eyes when your name comes up, like he's seen something beautiful that he's afraid might disappear. I've never seen him like this before, Miss Wade. You've given him hope, and that's something I didn't think anyone could do." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Your brother is an extraordinary man, Mabel. The trauma he survived doesn't diminish that. It proves it. Not every man would have the strength to build what he's built, to keep going despite everything. I know that. I just wish everyone else did too." Mabel's expression clouded. "People are talking, Miss Wade, about you and Caleb. Some of it's good. People are happy to see him courting someone, but some of it's not. Jim Garrett's been saying things, spreading rumors that Caleb's not fit for a respectable woman, that you're making a mistake." So the poison was already spreading. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. "People will always talk, Mabel. The question is whether we let that talk dictate our choices. That's what Caleb always says. But it's harder when the talk could hurt you, your job, your reputation. Then I'll just have to make sure I give them nothing legitimate to criticize. Your brother and I will conduct ourselves properly, and anyone who wants to make something inappropriate out of proper courtship will reveal themselves as small-minded." Eleanor met Mabel's eyes directly. "I'm not afraid of gossip, Mabel. I've survived worse. And I'm not going to let Jim Garrett or anyone else dictate who I can and cannot spend time with." Mabel impulsively hugged her. "You're perfect for him, Miss Wade. Just perfect." Wednesday evening arrived with agonizing slowness. Eleanor changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple but flattering green cotton, arranged her hair carefully, and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. This was just a picnic, just an evening with Caleb, nothing to be nervous about. Except it felt like everything. It felt like the beginning of something that could change her entire life. Caleb arrived precisely at 6, driving a small wagon rather than riding Ruby. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, wore a clean shirt, had shaved carefully, had tamed his hair. When he saw Eleanor waiting on the porch, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart stutter. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. "You look very handsome yourself." Martha appeared in the doorway with a basket. "I made you some cookies for your picnic, just a little something extra." She handed the basket to Caleb with a wink. "You two have a lovely evening. Eleanor, be back by 9, please." "Yes, Martha." They drove out of town in comfortable silence, and Eleanor watched the landscape change from buildings to open prairie. The evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. The sky was beginning to turn golden as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting everything in soft light. "I thought we'd go to Eagle Point," Caleb said. "It's about 3 miles out, has a good view of the valley. It's peaceful there." "That sounds perfect." They talked easily as they rode, about her first few days of teaching, about the children in her class, about Mabel's enthusiasm for her tutoring sessions. Caleb listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, and Eleanor found herself relaxing into the conversation, into the easy rhythm they seemed to find with each other. Eagle Point turned out to be a small rise overlooking a beautiful valley, with rock formations providing natural seats and shade. Caleb had brought a proper picnic: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and lemonade that was still cool from being wrapped in wet cloth. They spread a blanket and sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "This is beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Thank you for bringing me here. I come here sometimes when I need to think, when the ranch feels too small and my head feels too full. Something about the space out here, the silence, it helps." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then added, "I wanted to share it with you, wanted you to see the things I love about this place." Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I'm honored that you'd share something so personal with me." They ate slowly, savoring the food and the evening and each other's company. As the sun dropped lower, painting them in golden light, Caleb turned to Eleanor with an expression that was both nervous and determined. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you about my past, about the war. I know people have probably mentioned it, but I want you to hear the truth from me, not filtered through gossip or speculation." Eleanor set down her lemonade and gave him her full attention. "I'm listening." "I enlisted when I was 18, right after our father died. Mabel was just 5 years old, and I should have stayed with her, but I was young and angry and full of righteous fury about the cause. I thought war would be glorious, that I'd serve honorably and come home a hero." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Eleanor could see the pain in his eyes. "I was a fool." "You were young. We're all fools when we're young." "Maybe. But my foolishness cost me dearly." He stared out at the valley, his hands clenched together. "I fought in some of the worst battles of the war: Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, others whose names I try to forget. I saw men die in ways no one should die. I saw friends torn apart by cannon fire. I saw fields soaked red with blood. And I killed people, Eleanor. I shot men who were probably just like me, young, scared, fighting for something they'd been told was worth dying for." Eleanor reached out slowly and placed her hand over his clenched fists. He startled at the touch, then gradually relaxed, his fingers opening to lace with hers. "The shaking started at Antietam," he continued, his voice rough. "We'd been fighting for hours, and I couldn't make my hands steady anymore. Couldn't reload my rifle properly. My commanding officer thought I was a coward, that I was losing my nerve. Maybe I was. But I kept fighting because what else could I do? If I ran, I'd be shot as a deserter. If I stayed, I'd probably be killed anyway, so I stayed." "That's not cowardice, Caleb. That's courage of the highest order." "Doesn't feel like courage. Feels like I sold my soul piece by piece just to survive each day." He was quiet for a long moment. "By the time the war ended, I was barely functional. The shaking had gotten worse. I had nightmares every night, still do. I couldn't be around loud noises without breaking into a cold sweat. I'd worked as a carpenter before the war, but my hands weren't steady enough anymore to do that kind of precise work. I felt useless, broken, like I'd survived the war only to die slowly in peacetime." Eleanor squeezed his hand, tears sliding silently down her cheeks at the pain in his voice, at the rawness of his honesty. "Then I got word that Mabel had been placed with